Hello and welcome to the 2021 Annual General Assembly of the Climate Heritage Network, or as we're calling it, the Climate Heritage Leaders Summit. Here we are in Glasgow on at the start of COP26, and it's World Leaders Day, so we're having our Cultural Leaders Day as well. Delighted to be here. My name is Ewan Hislop, and I'm the co-chair of the Climate Heritage Network representing Europe and the CIS. We're located here today in the historic Merchants House in the heart of Glasgow city centre. The meeting is hybrid. There are about 30 of us in the room in person and many, many more of you joining us online from around the world. And we're delighted to have everyone with us today. Before we start, I'd like to invite Alison Turnbull, who's our Director of External Relations and Development at Historic Environment Scotland, our sponsors for today's event, to say a few words of welcome. Alison.
Thanks, Ewan, and hello, everyone. So I want to say welcome to Scotland and welcome to this event on behalf of Historic Environment Scotland, who are one of the co-chair organisations. So like many others in this room, I was at the launch of the network at Edinburgh Castle 2 years ago. And so much has changed in those last 2 years, whether that's on the global stage, but also for the network. There was a real buzz on that dark November evening about what could be achieved and what the network could mean. And all of this was working towards COP26. So the network's come out of this first stage of forming. We've got more than 250 members and a real presence at COP26, with culture on the agenda to a level that's never been seen before at a COP. And all of this shows the power of partnership and international working. So it's all the more impressive when you consider the majority of the Climate Heritage Network's life has been during lockdown. So whether it's you who are here in this physical room or you who are in the virtual room as well have been absolutely instrumental in making this happen. Today's really significant. We've got lots of great speakers and it marks the next stage for the Climate Heritage Network. It's a real celebration about what's been achieved so far, and it's an opportunity to hand over to the new co-chairs as well as looking forward to the next stage of our work, which is galvanising our activity. So I'm going to hand back now to Ewan. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. And to kick off our meeting today, we invited two of our young Scottish-based young professionals to make a short film to give you a flavour of some of the great things that are happening here in Glasgow. So they introduced themselves at the start, so I'm just going to ask for the film to run, please.
And the largest in Scotland. It has a rich tapestry of historic sites and places that document both its past and present. Shaped by the landscape around it, with the Clyde running east to west and the topography carved out by successive ice ages. The city has a distinct character, with historic and natural heritage coming together.
Glasgow, like cities all around the world, is today a very real risk from climate change, and the city's heritage is no stranger to that either. There are physical climate risks that will impact the city's heritage, but at the very same time, the city's heritage is also part of the solution to the climate crisis. We're off on a walk around the city today to visit examples of historic buildings that are actively contributing to solving the climate crisis. We'll go to the Brigade, Govan Hill Baths, Central Station and Bell Street Stables, and there we'll speak to people on the ground to find out how these places are contributing to solving the climate crisis.
But first off, we're going to catch up with an expert to see exactly what's going on with the climate right here.
So I'm Megan and I'm a climate consultant at the Met Office.
Can you tell us what Glasgow's future climate might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure it's not really a surprise to you guys that Glasgow is one of the wettest cities in the UK. It's projected that temperatures in summer and winter will increase by 1 to 3 degrees Celsius by 2050. While summers might be drier overall, What we do see is that when there is a rainfall event, this rainfall event will be more intense. Unfortunately, not such great news for winter, where precipitation in Glasgow is projected to increase by 5 to 20% by 2050. We really want to all work together to achieve this, just to reduce our emissions as much as possible, because we know that we can limit those impacts that might occur in a high emission scenario.
Thank you so much for your time, Megan. With that background in Glasgow's current and possible future climate from Megan, we're now setting off to find out what role historic buildings can play in helping Glasgow adapt to and mitigate climate change. Our first stop is the Brigget in Glasgow city centre. Constructed in the late 1800s, the Brigget started life as a fish market and operated until the 1970s. Abandoned for decades, the Brigget once faced an uncertain future. Today, the building has found a new lease of life as a hub for the creative industries in Glasgow, with space for visual artists and cultural organisations. It's a vital part of the city's cultural scene and an excellent example of how historic buildings can be saved for a 21st century use. We're meeting Audrey Carlin, Chief Executive of WASPs, the organisation that was responsible for bringing this building back into use. Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory of the building and WASP's involvement with the Brigget?
The Brigget was obviously built in 1873 as an exemplary hygienic market hall for Glasgow, and particularly focused on the fish industry at that time, and located right beside the Clyde. However, the markets moved eventually up to the motorway network up at Blockhearn in the late 70s, and this building became surplus to requirements and was earmarked for demolition. There was a campaign to save it and find new uses, and it took about 20 years for WASPs to come to the picture, but it wasn't until 2009 that we were able to get the building renovated, put artist studios in it, make it wind and watertight, service it, and do all the things that a fish market didn't have that made it suitable for creative people to work in. What an inspiring building. You know, every day I'm so blessed to walk in the door and think that I work here.
With the Brigget giving us an insight into how historic buildings can be repurposed and given a new lease of life, we're now off to Central Station to see an example of a place still performing its original and intended function.
The next stop on our trip is Glasgow Central Station, where we'll speak to Neil Murphy from Glasgow City Heritage Trust. We'll ask Neil about the history of the station, the role it plays in the everyday life of Glasgow City residents, and we'll find out how the station is playing its part in helping Scotland meet ambitious climate change targets. Could you give us a wee bit about the history of the station and how it's developed over the 20th and 21st century?
So this was all to do with the competition of various railway companies to get into Glasgow and bridge across the river. And because the river was a harbour, that was not easy to do. So the initial station was built between 1876 and 1879, but it very rapidly proved to be too small. And so it was then massively expanded at the turn of the century.
Is the historic and architectural features of the station, is that important to the station and its use?
So it's a really impressive building from that point of view, and it's got all these kind of fantastic sort of carving pods in it. And so what they end up doing is they base the whole thing on how to kind of get people to their platform as quickly as possible, and it's how water flows through a space. And so everything is kind of curved and sinuous to try and get people to flow towards their platforms, which of course, when you have like the Glasgow Fair and everybody's leaving town to go down the water, that's exactly what you need.
What do you think the role of somewhere like Glasgow Central Station is in helping Scotland meet quite ambitious climate change targets?
Well, I think it's incredibly important because it's kind of like this huge kind of machine that basically, you know, brings in people from the surrounding area and then passes them out through the city. Because that whole network of tram lines that are kind of coming into the city are all electrified, and the majority of them are, and then more are being electrified as well. It means it's a really, really low carbon way to travel.
From a major transport hub, we're now going to see what historic buildings can teach us about materials and skills and solving issues beyond the climate crisis. The Bell Street stables were built in the late 19th century to house the horses and equipment for Glasgow's cleansing department. Then, in the 1950s, the stables were converted to house the city's police horses. Today it has been converted again, this time into affordable rental flats. With ambitions to substantially increase the residential population here in Glasgow city centre, the conversions of the stables is another excellent example of reusing a historic building to meet 21st century needs. These are great examples for the construction industry of how they can reduce the sector's environmental impact. We're here today to talk to Andrew Cardwell from Collective Architecture, the architecture practice that was in charge of designing the retrofit of the stables. Hi, thanks for meeting us here. Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory to this building and your involvement with it?
Yeah, so this is Bell Street Stables. It was purpose-built by the cleansing department. When they originally built it, it was for the horses that they used at the time, and the carts and all the equipment. So they had stables on the west side there. You know, it was a noisy, there was 80 horses maybe in this space, and a lot of industrial activity, you know, so it was quite a busy, noisy building.
Can you also tell us a little bit more about where some of the materials were sourced from, and also the sustainability around those materials?
Yeah, so we're pretty sure that we've used the same stone from the same quarry down in the borders that the building was built from.
So that's a locally sourced stone?
Yeah, locally sourced stone.
What do you think the role that historic buildings like the stables have to play in terms of climate action?
No, I think they're a great opportunity. They're quite robust, they're quite adaptable, so, you know, actually they will take several iterations of use.
For our last stop, we're heading south of the river to see an incredible example of people coming together to save a historic building at the heart of their community.
Built in the 1910s, Govanhill Baths gave the local community wash houses, baths and a public swimming pool. The baths were closed in 2001, and since then they've become a site for local grassroots community activism, with the local community grouping together to really save the building that the baths were situated in, but also to give it a new lease of life. We're going to meet Fatima Ugan to find out more about how Govanhill Baths has been brought back into use. You've been here since the very beginning of
the very beginning, yeah.
Community-driven renovation, or sort of bringing the place back into life, so that's great. Could you tell us a wee bit about the history of Govanhill Baths?
It's an Edwardian swimming baths built at the start, essentially, of the First World War. And it was closed in 2001. That spurred a huge uprising locally, and we occupied the building. It is the longest occupation of a building in British history, a civic building, for 141 days with police and security and so on. And in 2012, we finally got the keys to the building and we moved back in, and now it's under community ownership.
I feel like there's big plans for the place going forward.
There is. This gives you a rough idea of what we're hoping for the buildings. And it's going to be a wellbeing centre. So it will have 2 of the 3 swimming pools back into operation. It will have a multi-purpose centre, a gym, a cafe, a Turkish sauna, and we're also going to be locating the pantry, our people's pantry, into the back where it used to be the steamy, the old laundrette. I think what's important about our buildings and the Govanhill Baths is that they were fought for. So that activist-based approach to owning property, you care for it, you believe in its future, you want to look after it.
Being able to retain buildings like this in a city centre location where people live, where it's easy to get to, is important than building something new.
These buildings were built 100 years ago and they're still standing. What does that tell you about sustainability? Let's build buildings that are going to last for generations and generations.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Glasgow and some of its historic buildings, learning a little bit more about how Glasgow's historic buildings and communities are fighting to help protect the city from climate change. We know climate change is the defining issue of our generation, but we hope that some of the things you've seen in this video help bring hope and offer new solutions for people when thinking about how we can adapt our historic buildings and cities to not only cope with climate change, but also help fight and mitigate the effects of what we're looking at in the future.
The other thing that we've seen today from the places that we've been to visit, I think, is the potential of the historic environment or historic structures to contribute to solving the climate crisis. I guess in summary, from what we've seen today, is really that the historic buildings, like the ones that we've been to today, they are very much part of the solution to the climate crisis. They are not part of the problem. We just need to get better at looking after them, at sort of valuing them and giving them a new lease of life in the 21st century.
Fantastic. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are when you're joining us virtually. I'm Julie Polanco. I have the great honor of being California State Historic Preservation Officer and the North American co-chair of the Climate Heritage Network. We are deeply honored today to be joined by the Deputy Lord Provost of Glasgow She is a member a trustee of the Glasgow Heritage Trust, a Green Councillor, and a very young person in her role. We're so delighted to have you speaking to us, particularly after we've had some grounding in your beautiful city. Would you please join us?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Lord Provost and the citizens of Glasgow, it's my immense pleasure to welcome you here from many countries around the world, the Climate Heritage Network, for your annual General Assembly, and at the start of this monumental moment for Glasgow, and indeed the world. I hope that the COP legacy will benefit our city and our citizens by bringing these issues home quite literally, by embedding the climate conversation into our everyday discourse, and by accelerating our own commitments to tackling the climate emergency. But even more importantly, I hope that this conference will be a platform from which to radically reframe our global commitment and responsibility to do much more in the fight against climate change. Glasgow is a city famed for its built heritage and its craftsmanship. A city that has attracted a clutch of accolades, including City of Culture, City of Science, City of Music, and City of Architecture. You may know King Malcolm III of Scotland recognised the value of the arts and made his sentiments clear by conferring the trades with a royal stamp of approval, a royal charter, after witnessing their contribution to the construction of Glasgow Cathedral, a magnificent medieval cathedral believed to have been built on the site of the tomb of St Kentigern, also known as our patron saint, St Mungo, a significant building that marks the birthplace of this city. I know the built environment, in terms of its historic and cultural value and importance, is a subject close to everyone here's hearts. For our built environment informs our past, our present. It gives meaning, a sense of place, and a unique character. You gather with a clear purpose to ensure COP26 leaves a positive legacy for the historic environment in Scotland and across the world. And we recognise the key role that experts like you play in this monumental task of preserving our historic environment and exploring sustainable solutions for the future. I believe one of the most exciting ways we can deliver this is by sharing examples and championing sustainable ways to reuse and retrofit our historic buildings and infrastructure. Some of the work Glasgow is doing is very much in this vein. Arguably one of our most characteristic built environment challenges is in housing and the need to improve both the condition and energy efficiency of our older tenements. Around 73% of people live in flats in Glasgow, many of them tenements. Given how central these buildings are both to Glasgow's unique character and housing need, this represents both a significant challenge and, indeed, incredible opportunity. As so much of this housing stock is very old, much of it pre-1919 and regrettably in poor state of repair. But if we can improve these buildings for the sake of our citizens and environment, we can also preserve so much of what makes our city unique and distinctive. And there are positive developments on this. A pilot project currently still underway on Nidri Road in the south side of Glasgow to assess the feasibility of retrofitting an entire block of flats to EnerFit standard. The success of this work will be critical to rolling out energy efficiency improvements across the whole of the city's historic tenement buildings. By committing to conserving the embodied carbon of our physical global heritage, we can make a substantial contribution to achieving net zero. And our communities are also playing their part in this, as we've already seen from the fabulous video just now. Community-run services which support people across Glasgow are being saved, and with this, so are bricks and mortar and embedded carbon. Communities have shown how much passion and vision there is to make better what is already there, not pull down and build again, which the market so often seems to want to do. A few additional examples in my own ward to complement the examples that have already been shown. An iconic B-listed former church building called the Pyramid, so valued by the local community, is going through this very process of renewal. In 2019, it was bought over by the community and is now being restored to its former glory, as well as renovated creatively to meet current needs and much higher energy efficiency standards. The Kinning Park complex, where I once worked, once also facing an uncertain future, like the Govan Hill Baths, which the community fought hard to retain, is going through a similar process. Recently acquired, it is now Its once ancient oil heating system is now a thing of the past, and it looks set to become a truly functional and sustainable place for the local and creative community who use it. It's also worth noting that this, a former school building, is one of many in Glasgow which sadly still lie vacant. We need to ramp up our efforts to realise the opportunity that lies within all of these buildings before it is too late. At the centre of this is the survival not just of our built heritage, but our global citizens and the generations that follow. We recognise that we need to listen to our communities, involve them, get them on board as we shape an exciting future and indeed renaissance for our built heritage, a task that will require courage as well as conviction. Glasgow is a city with a record of bold ambition, vision and determination, and we share your objectives. I am confident you will enjoy your stay here, and I encourage you all, although I realise I am speaking to the converted, to take the opportunity to gaze upwards and admire our wonderful architecture. To paraphrase the words of the city's patron saint, St Mungo, may COP26 allow the citizens of Glasgow and beyond to flourish. Thank you, and enjoy your conference.
Now that we've been grounded in this beautiful city, let's take a trip around the world. Our program today is in two parts. We have 5 vignettes of consequential, innovative accomplishments by Climate Heritage Network members throughout the last 2 years and around the world. Then we also have the 6 working group presentations from the Madrid-to-Glasgow plan. It's hard to believe we're here. We've successfully completed this plan with a lot of hard work and a lot of partners. We're also going to be debuting the resource library and having our election results. We did it. Culture shows up again, and we're very honored to be with you all today. So let's get started. I'd like to now introduce Armenia Sakatano, she's the Ministry of Culture of Italy, the Minister's Cabinet, and Armenia will be joining us by video.
key messages regarding the importance of building resilient societies and communities, facilitate targeted research, increase scientific cooperation on the reciprocal effects of climate change and culture, upscale the cultural dimension into climate change policies and mainstream culture and consideration into the global climate agenda, invite the parties of the Paris Agreement to consider including culture and cultural heritage in their adaptation communications, and mobilize society at the local levels towards achieving urban sustainability and contributing to the goals of the Paris Agreement, with several actions that we have discussed. The working group, the G20 culture working group that has been established, fully established, will continue working on the topic. Yes,
Erminia.
Yes.
There is a message from Rachel. Hi all, just to note, please only screen. So that can you so something like, can you start again? They're saying.
Oh.
There was a problem.
So you didn't hear the sound? Or you didn't see the presentation?
Rachel, can you?
Oh, okay.
Did you get the message? Did you get the message from them?
Okay, but can you hear me now?
I see here that they say that there is only sound is available. We could see the presentation, but sound was not available.
Ah, I'm sorry.
If you can hear me, Armenia, we could hear, everybody could hear you, but in the room, but we can hear you now.
So now you can hear me?
Yes.
And you see so you saw the presentation and you didn't hear me?
We did. Everybody heard you, but in the room. So I think just pick up where you were in your.
Yes, well, of course, I don't want to lose too much time. So I have no idea what message I passed. So the first message was the message related to the G20 Rome Leaders Declaration and the inclusion of culture for the very first time in the Leaders Declaration. This Leader Declaration refers, of course, to the G20 Culture Ministerial Declaration, where an important pillar has been dedicated to culture and climate action. An important reference also was made to using the opportunity of the COP26 to raise awareness on the importance of global action on climate change and its impact on cultural heritage and cultural diversity, but also the need to build greater resilience from the impact of climate change and climate-related disasters, and better leverage the potential of culture-based solutions for climate action. So I will not go into details in all the messages included in the declaration, but just want to state that all the discussion, all the messages, all the principles discussed within the Climate Heritage Network are included in the declaration. And it's the important work carried on by relevant international organizations, including ICOMOS. It is well acknowledged. Again, these are the key messages, and one important message, for instance, is to consider including culture and cultural heritage in adaptation communication. It is targeting all the parties to the Paris Agreement. Taking opportunity of the pre-COP in Milan, using at the maximum the opportunity offered by the Italian and UK partnership. Several events have been organized also by the Climate Heritage Network, with an important focus on the young generation, like Climate Heritage Narratives, the youth-led intergenerational dialogue for 2021. Also, other important events organized by the Ministry of Culture on young people facing climate change and the preservation of cultural heritage. And finally, we are organizing 2 events. One event on the 8th of November. It is a ministerial event since the participation of the 2 ministers, Mr. Dario Franceschini and the UK Secretary of State Nadine Dorries will participate, although due to the health situation, Minister Franceschini is also participating from remote. Andrew Potts is also participating. Johan Hislop is also participating. I will also be there, and we will discuss exactly. We will bring the message from the G20 from Rome to Glasgow with an important insight and discussion regarding adaptation and resilience. And another important event on the 11th of November will take place in the EU Pavilion. And this time, this will be organized also in cooperation with the joint programming initiative on cultural heritage and global change, Europa Nostra, and IFLA, ICOM, ICROM, and the Climate Heritage Network, of course. For the other events, I know that we will discuss, and this will be discussed during the day. Thanks.
Thank you, Armenia. Next to us, we have Dr. Will McGarry, Queen's University Belfast, and ICOMOS focal point for climate change and cultural heritage, who will be introducing the CVI Africa Vignette and his partners on that project. Will?
Great, thank you very much. I've got my chat open here, and but please somebody shout if there are any technical issues, otherwise I'll assume that people are hearing me okay. So hello everybody, and as Julie said, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever people are in the world. It's a real pleasure to speak to you today, and I know I speak for all of my co-speakers and probably everybody joining remotely when I say that I wish we could have been there in person with you this morning, and not only for what I'm sure was a hearty Scottish breakfast, but also to see you all again. My name is Will McGarry, and along with my colleagues, Dr. Ishan Losun-Oduya from ICOMOS Nigeria and Dr. Albino Japela from the African World Heritage Fund. And we're going to be speaking to you today about the CVI Africa project, which was actually launched just under a year ago, and I think has achieved great things in this very short period. And in many ways, it's appropriate that we are joining you remotely today, and because although it wasn't initially planned this way, pretty much every aspect of the CVI Africa project has happened remotely, from our fortnightly Zoom meetings to all our training and lectures to our workshops, which we're going to hear about today. It's also lovely to be speaking at the AGA of the Climate Heritage Network, without which this project would never have happened. And this is an appropriate time and venue to note the tremendous efforts of a widely distributed and various project team brought together by the CHN to realize this project. If the CHN is about mobilizing talents, like we say on our website, then I think the CVI Africa project is a great example of just this. We had 12 project partners from 4 continents, which meant we were able to utilize and bring together an incredible collection of knowledge and expertise, although it also sometimes made scheduling meetings quite tricky. It was generously funded by the Arts Humanities Research Council and the UK Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and I'd like to specifically acknowledge their ongoing support, advice and flexibility in what's been quite a challenging year for projects. Before introducing the CVI Africa project, let me just first introduce you briefly to the methodology central to it. The CVI process, which was developed by Dr. Scott Heron and Dr. John Day from James Cook University, is a rapid tool which provides an overall assessment of low, moderate or high for the vulnerability of World Heritage sites, specifically to climate change. And as such, it fits somewhat of a gap in the tools and skills that we currently have. The process initially identifies the unique heritage and socio-economic values of an individual site, and then works with in-country climate scientists to identify potential hazards and impacts to these values, balancing these with the adaptive capacities of both the sites and their associated communities. To date, before this project, the CBI had only been applied in sites in Western Europe and Australia, and so this project was the first time that the CBI process had been applied in Africa. So in short then, the CBI Africa project is exploring the vulnerability of African World Heritage properties to climate change, and in doing that, it had two distinct elements to it. The first was training, and in this we took 6 heritage managers who were chosen from a cohort of 300 applicants from across the continent of Africa to take part in a 10-week course on climate vulnerability, which was based on the CBI process. They came from Cabo Verde, Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, Tunisia, and Uganda. And the entire course ended up happening remotely and involved all our project partners looking at a really wide range of topics, including World Heritage Management, climate science, value mapping exercises, and CBI-derived vulnerability assessments. Following completion of the training course, 2 CBI workshops were held at World Heritage sites in Nigeria at the Sukur Cultural Landscape, and in Tanzania at the ruins of Kilwa Kiswani and the ruins of Songo Manora. Both were hybrid events with local participants attending in person and others joining remotely over Zoom. The Kilwa workshop actually only took place 2 weeks ago and went really, really excellently in Dar es Salaam, and the Sukur workshop happened in September. And I'd now like to pass over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Ishalosun Adoya, who, along with Professor Drain Downs of the University of Highlands and Islands, led the steering committee for this workshop. Ishalosun.
Thank you very much, Will. I'm just checking the sound. Please confirm that you can hear me, Rachel. Yes. Okay, thank you. So, the CBI Africa project has contributed to mobilizing national organizations to address the intersections between climate and heritage in Nigeria. In Nigeria, the project focused on the Sukur Cultural Landscape World Heritage Site, which is located in the Mandara Mountains, along the border between Nigeria and Cameroon. The workshop took place in the state capital, Yola, and participants included 7 representatives of the World Heritage Site who were either born or actually lived there, staff of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, the National Heritage Institution, staff of the Department of Climate Change from the Federal Ministry of Environment, the Nigerian CBI Africa trainee, and the academia. The 5 other CBI Africa trainees joined remotely, as well as our facilitators, Drs. Heron and Day from Australia, while Professor Jane Downs, who also led the National Steering Committee along with me, connected from Scotland. The workshop identified, next slide please. The workshop identified 3 top climate stressors at the World Heritage Site as part of the preliminary to assessing the OUV vulnerability of the site. It then went on to assess the vulnerability of the site's OUV to these climate stresses. For us during this workshop, the presence of community members was critical to carrying out this rapid assessment because their lived experience supplemented the gaps from data that was gathered from the nearest data station located at nearly 200 kilometers from the site. As a direct result of these observations regarding the collation of climate data, one of our workshop participants from National University actually donated a rain gauge to the Sukur community during the workshop. And he's currently mobilizing resources to set up a weather station at the World Heritage Site. Many thanks to Dr. Haruna, and again, many thanks to the CBI Africa project for having made this mobilization possible. The CBI Sukur workshop created an opportunity for national dialogue between the heritage and climate sectors. It also flagged issues such as raising community awareness and documenting known memory of any adaptations to changes in weather and climate patterns. It identified the research and policy gaps regarding this particular, first of all, the research gaps for the site, and then the policy gaps at national level, that will need to be addressed to deepen knowledge and provide a space for these discussions to continue to take place at national level. The workshop report is currently under preparation. We'll be ready for release, we hope, in the first quarter of next year. And we are also hoping that the work that has been done, we are hoping to carry this work forward through other projects that we build upon these results. We are grateful again to the CVI Africa project and to our generous donors for making this possible. And I would like to also hand over now to my colleague, Dr. Chopella of the Africa World Heritage Fund. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Isha Lawson, and greetings, distinguished colleagues and guests. Can you hear me properly? Yes. Great. So on behalf of the Africa World Heritage Fund, which is a Category 2 center under the auspices of UNESCO, and with the primary mandate to support the implementation of the World Heritage Convention in Africa, we could not be more delighted to be privileged enough to be part of the project. As one of our primary mandates is to help countries across the continent to improve their efforts on conservation of World Heritage sites. One of the key concerns has been how to understand the impact of climate change and therefore strategize and develop appropriate conservation strategies and measures. So therefore, by being part of the CVI and supporting its pilot implementation in 2 of the World Heritage sites has given us enormous ground for not only learn as we implement the tool and this methodology, but as my colleagues have described, it had an enormous component of capacity building. Now going forward, we're now looking into how do we build from this experience in strengthening this capacity building across the continent, looking not only through the colleagues who have been part of this training, but also how do we tie this, what appears to be a very useful tool to the broader efforts of conservation of world heritage. So this will also lead us to focus more on strengthening our partnerships with key actors and stakeholders, which we are enormously grateful for all the support through this process, but also in the same framework, working with institutions such as e-commerce and other CHN organizations to encourage more African institutions to also join the network and join the efforts on not only raising awareness, but also being more engaged in the response on the role of heritage to tackle climate. And here also another critical area for not only concern, but also focus moving forward, obviously has to deal with raising awareness. And we're looking into how the different groups, including the youth, would be more engaged on not only being more aware and engaged in climate action, but also looking into how the experience from the CVI can be showcased not only at the global stage, such as forums such as the World Heritage Committee in coming July, but also looking into the various platforms that will help us raise awareness. So those are some of the areas where we would strongly support further engagement into bringing the lessons learned from the CVI Africa into future implementation, and hopefully that will strengthen the position and also help us address some of the critical issues concerning climate action across the continent. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to our distinguished colleagues from around the world, giving us our first two vignettes celebrating our success of the last 2 years from culture at the G20 and the CVI Africa project. At the heart of the Climate Heritage Network's work in the last couple of years has been the Madrid-to-Glasgow Action Plan. And to tell us about that in the first of a couple of sessions on that is Hannah Fluck from Historic England.
Thank you, Ewan. It is a real honour to talk to you today about the Madrid-to-Glasgow Action Plan. So 2 years ago at COP25 in Madrid, just 1 month after we launched the network in Edinburgh, we launched the ambitious Madrid-to-Glasgow Action Plan. The idea of this was to have a little bit less blah, 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 and to concentrate on some actual tangible outputs that would help us achieve our ambitions of mobilising arts, culture and heritage for climate action. And this action was based upon what you, our members, said you wanted us to focus on. And after that event in Edinburgh where we launched the network, we asked what you wanted us to do, and 7 groups of climate heritage networks came together over the last, the intervening 2 years to produce some of these tangible outputs to help with this mobilisation and to help make the progress that I think we're seeing today. So 2 years later, I think we've achieved what we set out to do. It's extremely exciting to be able to talk to you about the content of some of these. And you're going to hear more from most of these working groups in a moment, but just a little bit of an insight into some of the groups. Also, just to say, if you want to find out more, we do also have the Climate Heritage Fridays that we host at Historic England, which includes presentations from each of these working groups. And if you're really into it, you can see what they said this time last year and what they're saying now, because we have the previous ones up there, so you can look at the season 1 and also catch up on season 2. I need to... Is it working? Can I have the next slide? Oh, that way. I think it's safe to say the slide thing isn't working. Brilliant. So working group 1 was all about communicating the role of culture and heritage in climate action and creating toolkits to help us really achieve that. Next slide, please. So working group 2 was about the cultural case for valuing traditional knowledge as climate change technology, the information and that knowledge and its value in addressing climate change. And the output from that is a white paper, which work is underway on that at the moment. Next slide, please. So working group 3 was about policy and technical for toolkit for policy, technical and public audiences about reusing buildings, building reuse as climate action. We've already heard a little bit about that today in the videos about Glasgow and the way in which the city of Glasgow are reusing their historic buildings, which was fantastic to see. So I'm sure the members of Working Group 3 were nodding enthusiastically at that. Next slide, please. So Working Group 4 is about this systematic assessment and inclusion of climate heritage, culture and heritage in climate policy. In particular, developing a research paper that systematically analysed the way in which heritage and culture and the arts are included within climate policy through the high-clip methodology. Next, please. Thank you. Working Group 5 was about the role of culture in climate resilient development strategies. And there is a report produced by that working group. Next, please. And working group 7 is looking at models for supporting climate action by local communities and indigenous peoples. And again, there's a toolkit for engaging and communicating that work that was the output of that. And finally, there's no slide for working group 8. Well, maybe that's because it encompasses all the others. So working group 8, I think we see, brilliant. We can see the evidence of the success of that working group in what's happening over the next 2 weeks. So this was about really a big push to raise awareness, elevating arts, culture and heritage voices at the COP26. And I think it's absolutely extraordinary. When we were in Madrid 2 years ago, there were a handful of us, what did you call it, Andrew? Chugging our way around, networking, handing out business cards with our little banner in a corner somewhere in a shared stand. And to think that we've got a dozen events, something like that, but properly embedded within the COP programme, I think Working Group 8 should be incredibly proud of achievements, as should you all, because it's all contributing to that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first of our series of speakers. So we're going to hear from Queen Quet on Working Group 7 and their work.
Peace and blessings. Glad for one more again with all 100 children from around the world for the Climate Heritage Network Leadership Summit. We're glad for day one more again from the Sea Islands, right here in the Gullah Geechee Nation. What day of the southeast coast of the United States and things like that. So, with the yeti, we the correct we teach. So, but I know many of you don't speak that language. So I'm going to speak this way with you today. And I'm also going to present in a way that you're probably not used to me presenting if you were there when we first decided to all gather together in California to actually mobilize heritage as part of this climate change initiative and really dealing with it. And I'm so proud that from that Global Climate Action Summit and our events, it emerged CHN, as we now call it, and to have been there with most of you that are probably there right now in Glasgow to actually unveil our network to the world was definitely a great achievement. So I was happy to hear from Andrew about today and that we were going to gather once again and have the leaders come together to share about our groups. The first thing on behalf of my co-coordinator of Working Group 7, Soiree, that I want to share is that as we looked at the Climate Heritage Network's definition as an interconnected community of arts, cultural, and heritage organizations around the world that are dedicating to addressing the climate crisis by aiding our communities and taking on climate change and achieving the ambitions of the Paris Agreement, questions came to our minds because we know that our focus is on the indigenous people and local communities and their ability that because they first experienced climate change. So we knew that a fundamental shift needed to take place, both in attitude and action toward indigenous people and local communities, as well as their invaluable knowledge. We know it's urgent. We all know this is urgent. That there's an urgent need to inspire dramatic behavioral change in the greater worldwide population. And that there has to be an effort for everyone to join together and save and sustain our shared environment. We have one planet, only one. So we wanted to bring us together as a global community. When we talk about the various partners and various collaborators here in CHN, we know that a lot of these are museums and institutions and global organizations. And there are a lot of initiatives going on that we pray will answer these questions that came to mind. How can the majority of our global citizenry begin to be convinced to adapt on a large scale? Large enough to really make a difference. The sustainable practices evolved over the millennia by indigenous peoples. We want them to start to take that into consideration, but how do we get there? That's the big question. So with these different initiatives, there are tiny house movements we thought of, there's the living off the grid movement, there's the slow food, and these are very popular in small regions here and there. But we know that we have to get people to redefine sustainable indigenous practices in terms of how they can be applied to a modern industrial society. Because this industrialization, we realize, has also started the wrong mobilization to many indigenous people being displaced from the communities in which we do sustain our culture. And so this is a critical time for us to examine this necessity to redefine sustainable indigenous practices. And so that we can get the majority of global citizenry to be involved and make the shift that we want. So we started to put together a toolkit so that people could take to heart what our working group focuses on and then utilize it where they are. And we pray it will be an inspiration to you. So indigenous people and local communities are the first to experience climate change. We all can agree, but we all need to also agree that we remain resolute in contributing to environmental protection in small but very effective ways with a very deep understanding of the skills and the cultural resources to adapt to the effects of this climate crisis. So again, the questions: how can we embolden these cultural heritage, indigenous communities, these local communities to be strong, to voice their own concerns, to take formidable stands to confront this climate emergency? And how can we support their invaluable efforts to restore nature? We wanted to answer that by saying, starting right here with all of us that are part of the Climate Heritage Network, that we would urge global organizations to truly get and connect to the cultural organizations to form a climate strategy to create change. Cultural organizations have to take this issue seriously. They're able to communicate the collective message far and wide through their public platforms in order to rally support for indigenous people and local communities. Many of you who operate museums, whether they are house museums or major museums, yes, you display artifacts, but we pray that many of you are also tapping into the local community and bringing in the living legacies that bring those artifacts to life. And that way helps also to sustain that community, because there's a resilient presentation of, as we would say here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, who they be. So some of our members do this. Musée d'Ethnographie de Geneviève, or Geneva. The MEG is a place of sharing with and learning from the cultures of the world, which considers the challenges of today's society from various angles, taking the measures of global, sociological, and societal and environmental changes. The MEG, as we call it, has initiated a profound transformation with objectives that aim to decolonize the museum, strengthen local and international partnerships, including new audiences, inspire creation, and become a benchmark museum in the field of sustainable development. Now, the Ethnographic Museum of Geneva is a living museum that promotes indigenous peoples and local communities' ways of knowing in favor of climate change mitigations and adaptations among the audience of MEG through exhibitions, conferences, lectures, debates, film screenings, and workshops. And as you can see there, they just recently had some of the things that are going on. They have an exhibit that's still going on into 2022 on Indigenous peoples' alternatives. Now, my co-coordinator for work in Group 7 is the director at Chiang Mai City Arts and Cultural Center. And the Chiang Mai City Arts and Cultural Center is the cultural center that works in historical and cultural heritage communication aimed at developing the city by recovering and promoting cultural heritage as an engine of sustainable development. The Chiang Mai City Arts and Cultural Center has successfully mobilized a network of empowered, fully engaged local communities working on city regeneration projects and environmental concerns. The center provides a public space in the heart of the city, a central hub where government, civil society, and citizens can work together to advance a shared vision. Here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, we have a song, work together, children, don't you get weary, great camp meeting in the promised land. That song comes to my soul as I look at this particular slide that's part of a package of them that we prepared from Working Group 7 as part of a toolkit, because as you can see, the folks are meeting. And this would be a promised land if all of us can meet and gather and mobilize and share more for this generation. But there are these special places that I love as well, and I'm sure most of you do too, like our libraries that serve as repositories for even the things we're writing now, the white papers, the other things we're sharing, these elements we're sharing today that can be shared elsewhere. So the Charlotte Library in Vermont in the United States has a keen awareness of global culture, is passionate about engaging with the rapidly changing world, and seeks to enhance the role of the library by collaborating with the community, critical with the community, to respond to climate change and to build resilient neighborhoods. The Charlotte Library aims to be a part of a community which responds to climate change and builds resilient communities. The seed sharing program is expanding the scope of the library to build a strong community, food security, and promote a good environment and quality of life in the community. The Charlotte Library reminds me a lot of our St. Helena Branch Library because it's more like a community center with books in it. And so we also have a garden here, and we plant seeds in the minds, in the souls, and in the hearts that we pray that grow to be places and spaces of inspiration for the future. So the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition that I founded partners with our St. Helena Branch Library and many people and organizations around the world. We work with and for the citizens of the Gullah Geechee Nation to ensure that our human rights and the landscapes, which are called the Sea Islands in the Low Country, are protected so that our Gullah Geechee cultural heritage continues for generations to come. We always advocate for climate action that protects cultural heritage communities on our coast. And as I often say, we the Binya and we in the Guayna, we're tall and things like that. As the cedar riser take, so do we. And so we depend on the land and the sea. My culture is inextricably tied to the land and the sea of these islands. We still harvest from the land and from the waterways. And so the beach for us is a place to which we go for physical and spiritual nourishment. Hana children can see the idea right here in the water and things like that even coming to Hana. And I pray that this year water coming to Hana for heal Hana soul this year day and for the libation for CHN one more again. And so truly this nourishment, this type of physical and spiritual nourishment keeps us sustained to keep going forward and to sustain and give life. And so the integrity of our culture and the land are tied together in very, very intimate ways, as you see stated on the slide. The Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, I'm sure, feels the same way that we do. The Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage in India has established a mission of conserving heritage and educating its community using a variety of innovative approaches through networking and membership. It has especially prioritized measures to combine climate change with cultural heritage and exhibits and outreach. And you can just see a few examples of some of that work that they've done over the years. Now, I'm sure all of us want to inspire the next generation. And so we've also wanted to highlight here, and we've highlighted here, the Youth Foundation of Bangladesh. The Youth Foundation of Bangladesh, focusing mainly on youth-centric initiatives, is dedicated to building awareness of the Bangladeshi people. So as you see, they clearly tell you what they're all about. It's time for the youth to lead nature. And we agree. And I'm sure that's why we have the Cultural Heritage Network and all that we're doing, so that in the future, there's not just the words and the videos of us that are considered leaders now being seen, but that we've inspired a new generation of leaders. So YFB works toward the eradication of poverty, quality education, gender equity, empowerment, reducing inequality, human rights, social economic problems, and environmental issues. Because in totality, Working Group 7 wants it to be clear that we realize that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that many small local movements do not sufficiently create change unless there are enough numbers. So what is critical now more than ever is an effective international climate strategy to combine the cultural knowledge and the efforts of all Indigenous peoples and local communities into a unified, widespread, overwhelming action, coherently and synergistically, and our collective efforts may be strong enough to then combat climate change. We feel that if we do this, we definitely would have achieved what Working Group 7 is about, which is to promote ways for cultural institutions and the arts, culture, and heritage fields to champion climate action by local communities and Indigenous people. And so on behalf of Working Group 7, I'm honored to have the opportunity to share our first product with all of you, and we pray that it is an inspiration too. I salute all of you. I thank all of you for allowing me the opportunity to be a prideful founding member of the Climate Heritage Network and to continue to lead on such a critical thing. So from my community here in the Gullah Geechee Nation to all of you, we pray that you are blessed, that you are safe, that you are healthy, and that we all sustain the cultural heritage wherever we are. So thank you for all of we right here. And this your lion in the sea and thing like that. This your the Queen Quet, head upon the body of the Gullah Geechee Nation, and Working Group 7, co-coordinator and thing like that for the Climate Heritage Network. Peace and blessings continue to stand and continue to save these cultural communities and our heritage.
Thank you. Inspirational as ever from Queen Quet, Chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation. And I think greater than the sum of our parts is probably another good motto for the Climate Heritage Network. I want to introduce now Jordi Pasquale, Coordinator of United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG Culture Committee, who's going to talk about the work of Working Group 5. Thank you, Jordi.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am deeply sorry I cannot be in Glasgow with you. I am talking from Barcelona, 1st of November 2021. The role of culture in climate resilient development, strategies for strengthening sustainable development while promoting transformative climate action, is an initiative launched by Working Group 5 of the Climate Heritage Network, together with United Cities and Local Governments, the Committee on Culture of United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG. The report aims to support a better understanding of the cultural enabling conditions for climate resilient development pathways, CRDP, and to offer insights into how cultural actors can support the delivery of these CRDP, climate resilient development pathways, towards a 1.5 warmer world. The CRDP describe trajectories that pursue the dual goals of strengthening sustainable development and at the same time pursuing transformative climate action. Our report, utilizes key elements of previous work done by the IPCC, concretely the 2018 publication on sustainable development, poverty eradication, and reducing inequalities. In fact, the IPCC report omits how culture and values are enabling conditions for CRDP. Yes, the report identifies culture and values as enabling conditions, but omits how this can be made operational. Our report has been written to provide a deep and full treatment of the topic of culture in climate resilient development pathways, CRDP, in very concrete ways. The report operates in the context of the global framework by United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, the largest world organization of cities and local governments. Our organization, UCLG, has reaffirmed a solid commitment to increase awareness of the impacts of climate change and to the implementation of a sustainable green transition agenda. It is also very coherent. Our report, our working group 5 in the CHN report is totally coherent with the pioneering work of UCLG, the Toolkit Calls of 21 Actions, approved in 2015, with 100 concrete actions around 9 areas: cultural rights, heritage, diversity, creativity, education, environment, equality, urban planning, or cultural governance. In support of the report, during these last months in 2021, the UCLG Culture Committee and the Climate Heritage Network invited the contributions of our members to provide one or more case studies that illustrate culture-based strategies that pursue these dual goals of transformative climate action and at the same time strengthening sustainable development. Case studies represent a wide variety of strategies, including bricks and mortar development, real estate infrastructure, but also management and planning projects, legislation, policy, financing, city-to-city cooperation, public participation, awareness raising, education, or training. The report presents the 33 case studies received in a very friendly and easy-to-read way. Examples: the Melting Snow and Rivers in Food project that promotes two-way exchange between cultural organizations in Uganda and the United Kingdom, or the citizen participation for sustainable mobility in the historic city center of Quito, or in Benin, the project Otamari, the ecologist architect. Gratitude, sincere gratitude to all Climate Heritage Network members that have been involved in the writing of these case studies. The conclusions of the report: we cultural operators need to be at once realistic and imaginative in working with the CRDP, the Climate Resilient Development Pathways. The report identifies 6 policy areas for consideration by cities and local governments in their local policies, as well as by stakeholders active in this field. The 6 policy areas are: imagine new futures, understand climate vulnerability, engage with carbon, engage with diverse partners, seek out synergies, prepare for trade-offs, and attention to equity and climate justice. I would be delighted to provide details of each one of these 6 policy areas, but I think that I will stop the presentation here. The report will be uploaded very soon. I believe on Thursday this week, it will be uploaded to the CHN and to the UCLG websites. Huge gratitude, sincere gratitude to the UCLG teams that have been involved in the report. Huge gratitude to the CHN members that has been active in the elaboration of this report. And the most sincere gratitude, recognition to Andrew Potts, who was at the beginning of this idea, who wrote the report. We believe that this report will be extremely useful to CHN, to UCLG, and to all those having responsibilities in local sustainable development and climate action. Thank you very much. Have a good day. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Jordi and for the previous speakers to give us updates on CHN working groups. Now we go back to hear some more vignettes, some more success stories from the last 2 years of the CHN. One of the highlights for me in the last year has been the emergence of a Climate Heritage Network Youth Forum, young professionals. So we're going to hear from a couple of the members of that, the founding members, starting with my colleague from Historic Environment Scotland, Louise Kelly.
Hi everyone, and sorry, I've got my notes on my phone. So today I am here in Glasgow speaking to you, but I'm not the only one who's going to be speaking today. I'm also going to be joined by 3 colleagues who are joining us virtually from around the world, actually, different places, each of them. So the CHN Youth Forum, today we're going to give you a bit of background about how that developed, including talking about our youth pre-COP26 events, which were the Climate Heritage Narratives, the youth-led intergenerational dialogues. We're going to start with giving you a little bit of an oversight of what happened there for those of you that weren't able to join us. And then some of the sort of outcomes, the recommendations that we have as the Youth Forum for what we should do and how we should take that forward. And then finally, I'm going to tell you how you can get involved and how you can invite your young colleagues to get involved in the new Youth Forum. So first, we have Reem is going to tell us a little bit about the events that we had during the pre-COP. And hopefully she's joining us virtually.
Thank you, Louise. So we had a series of events, three events themed Climate Heritage Narratives, Youth Intergenerational Dialogues, composed, as I said, of 3 sessions. The first was on sustainable tourism, and in this session we discussed questions on how to overcome tourism and sustainability issues through community-based and community-led tourism, volunteering tourism, virtual tourism, also using new technologies. This having also in the background the whole picture of decarbonization and limitation of global warming. In the second session, which was on traditional skills and knowledge, we discussed intergenerational transfer of skills and know-how among custodian communities, like from generation to generation, but also with conservation specialists in both senses. In the last session was on transformative change. We discussed how organizational and transformational change could be driven by the youngest generation, and how this transition is multidimensional, multi-actor, but also multidisciplinary. We have come to a conclusion that whether we call it climate justice or just transition, we are different players with different perspectives, but we have all one common goal, which is in this journey of climate heritage action. I would like to stress that the events were intergenerational and brought to the table together professionals and youth enthusiasts from all backgrounds, from different career stages and from across the globe, all showing great example on how youth-led care for heritage could drive climate action. And thank you. My colleagues will continue.
And now we're joined by Pravali, and she'll tell us some of the first recommendations that we have that were based on the discussions that were had at the events in September and October.
Thank you, Louise. We've had very insightful comments from the younger generations. I'm going to just read out some of them for you now. The first one is that our heritage sites have coped with drastic climate changes in the past, and the knowledge to survive these transitions using local materials and employing circular economies resides within the heritage communities. So it is our hope that this information would be disseminated to the broader society, both within and outside of the heritage sector. The second recommendation is that we need to ensure wider cooperation and knowledge sharing on heritage and climate action across sectors and geographies, focusing on upskilling current practitioners, including young people, with a focus on educating the future generations. We must acknowledge that not all heritage sites can be saved and find the best way to manage this loss, implement mitigative measures wherever feasible, and ensure proper documentation wherever possible. We must encourage the concept of developing destinations where sites are connected to their wider surroundings and promote sustainable travel and tourism at these places, adapting to the challenges to public transport that has been caused by the pandemic. As these issues related to sustainable tourism remain interconnected, we must understand our current position and challenges to create plans for the future, engaging with tourists, supporting citizen science to collect data for site managers, and also preventing overexploitation through the concept of voluntourism, bringing together volunteering and tourism. Heritage professionals should always look to local communities for solutions where traditional skills and knowledge can be shared and should be made available for conservation of built heritage. It is crucial that we also involve local communities in the development of plans and policies related to climate heritage resilience, and also in the creation of community-focused tourism initiatives. These are just some of the recommendations that the youth have come up with. I'm going to pass it on to our other co-convener, Yolo, who will take us through the rest of the recommendations. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Pravali. Thank you, Louise, and thank you, everyone listening to us. Greetings from Mexico City to all of you. I will continue now with the recommendations from our event. So the next one recommendation, it will be acknowledging the use of new industrial materials acknowledging that the use of new industrial material causes issues for heritage and the environment. We must encourage finance and leadership training to support the use of traditional materials. The perception from communities about the commercial and traditional construction materials should also be considered and worked upon by specialists. Local involvement should be a must. We, as young emerging professionals, should work on making this a reality. We must acknowledge the different actors and the different perspectives to lead to a holistic goal to achieve. We must work on increasing the involvement of youth in many different parts of the heritage sector to aid the ambition of broadening the conversation. We must create and support opportunities for climate heritage-related research and focus on both the tangible and intangible heritage. Nature-based solutions, traditional knowledge, and resilience in the context of climate heritage should be valued in a more concrete way. And finally, traditional knowledge and skills are being lost every day. So we must continue to have these conversations and explore outreach and engagement opportunities with younger generations. Storytelling by young people can be a powerful tool to bring about the required digital transformation while working with communities so as to bring together technology and tradition. Well, thank you very much, and it was very nice to see you all.
Thank you. Okay, so that's just a few minutes summary of what was 9 hours of conversations over the 3 events that we had. And I think that you can see from what was included that it's really essential that we have continued intergenerational dialogue. So even though I'm about to tell you some ways that you can get involved, please don't think this is only for youth, and we want to include everyone in this. So the first thing that we have is a newly launched Instagram account, and we've never had a CHN Instagram account before. So you can find us at CHN Youth, and I'd encourage all of you to follow us. And if you're a young person or you're involved in a group that's got a lot of young people and you want to do a takeover or share something that you've been working on, then please do get in touch, because we'd really like to use that platform to kind of profile and highlight the great work that's happening. The second way that you can get involved is to join our mailing list. And alongside our mailing list, we're also starting a list of potential speakers, because through organising these events and some of the other events that are happening in the next few weeks for COP, we've found out that there's some amazing speakers as part of CHN, but it can be challenging to find the right contact details and know who's available to talk about what subjects. So we're starting this list. It's opt-in, but when you do opt in to be on the list, then you give us permission to share your contact details when relevant with other CHN members. And we hope that that will allow a wider variety of people to be contacted to speak at various events. So we have got a document for that, and I think that's going to be shared in the chat for those of you that are watching us virtually. Those of you that are in the room, if you try and catch me later, I'll make arrangements for that to be sent over to you. But if you don't catch me and you don't catch any of this, you can contact us on youth.climateheritagenetwork@gmail.com. That's youth.climateheritagenetwork@gmail.com. And if you send any emails there, then one of the four of us will pick that up. And finally, we've not even officially launched the CHN Youth Forum yet. We will be launching it officially this Friday at a COP26 multi-level action pavilion event called Culture Driving Climate Resilient Futures. It is a Blue Zone event, and many of us that are speaking will be doing so virtually, so you can also join us virtually. And we'd really appreciate the support of having lots of friends and colleagues from around the world to support us in that launch, so please do join us if you can. And that's everything from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Louise, and your three other speakers for a very, very powerful intervention. And tune in on Friday online to hear more of the same powerful messages. The next vignette we have to illustrate CHN at work is from our distinguished colleague, Carl Elefanti, who's in the room and is going to join us. Carl, I never know how to introduce you, so I'll let you introduce yourself, please. Carl.
Well, thank you, Ewan. It's wonderful to be here today, and even though I'm only one standing at the podium here in Glasgow, I'm co-presenting today with Dr. Robin Pender from Historic England, who has prepared a video that's part of this presentation. Of course, it will come to no surprise to anyone that building sector considerations have been part of the Climate Heritage Network. Many of the organizations that are involved with CHN have building heritage preservation as part of their missions. But I'm here to really talk a little bit about built heritage as a specific engagement that CHN has been very active in over the last couple of years, and to highlight two strategic partnerships that we've established to really advance that. And to just open, I want to say two things about built heritage. The first is that we totally recognize that built heritage is only one of the 6 types of heritage categories that are recognized by UNESCO and ICOMOS, and that it really is by no means the end-all and be-all of heritage considerations. But like other aspects of heritage, building heritage is being lost to climate change now at an alarming and accelerating rate. And like the other categories, it's an essential part of understanding our culture and heritage. There's one thing that does set built heritage apart, in that it's living heritage in the sense that most heritage buildings are occupied. They're used day in and day out. They're heated and cooled and lighted, et cetera. That means that literally built heritage is part of the problem. And that means that in many corners of the climate mitigation and adaptation conversations, built heritage is considered to be part of the problem, not part of the solution. So it's extremely important for CHN to be an active player in this building sector climate action to really make sure that the voices are heard about really what is appropriate for building sector heritage conservation. So we've put the effort into establishing two really important strategic partnerships in this area that I wanted to tell you about today. So the first is with the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, the Global ABC as it's called. Global ABC is literally the designated group by the UN Environment Program to collect data and publish on building sector issues, et cetera, providing education, many, many, many things. If we want a seat at the table, the Global ABC is the table. And then the second organization I wanted to talk about here today is the Architecture2030, which is an NGO like CHN, a group that played a pivotal role of bringing building sector issues to Paris now 6 years ago, and is really an authoritative source on what building sector adaptation is. And I can tell you the difference there in what was happening in Paris versus today is about existing building to a huge extent. So I just will, as I introduce Robin's video, just add the following thoughts, and that is much of what's going to be talked about over the next 2 weeks is going to be focused on accelerating climate action, which means really talking about ending behaviors more quickly. And I think that we in the arts and culture and heritage world recognize that what is just as important is to talk about the behaviors we need to begin in 2030 and 2040 and 2050. And that's really what we hope to really be, not really just tell you about, but really show you today. So it's time to create equitable, healthy, ecological, and inspiring cities. And to do that, it means reconnecting with the earth, reconnecting with our humanity, and reconnecting with our heritage. And I'd like to go ahead and start the video from Dr. Robin Pender. And again, she's not going to tell you about what that means with heritage conservation in the building sector, but show you. Thank you.
When I first heard Carl speak in Kansas City 6 years ago, he said something that's inspired me ever since, and it wasn't about the greenest building. He said, "We can save the world." And when everyone had stopped laughing rather nervously, he said, "If not us, then who?" And when it comes to the CHN, he couldn't be more right. I want to show you this very familiar graph of energy use over time. You all know it well, but let's think a bit harder about that hockey stick. Why is the built environment using so much energy now? And why have we barely slowed things down with all our energy initiatives? Now, this puzzles a lot of people from the global north, where after the Industrial Revolution, they started throwing fossil fuel at every possible situation. But it won't surprise anyone here from the global south, from the places where they never have forgotten how to run and build low energy, low carbon built environments. We now make exactly the same high energy buildings from Moscow to Singapore, but the vernacular built environment is local. It's all about the local materials and the local labor instead of centralized building products, so you can easily and cheaply maintain and repair and adjust so your building lasts for centuries. And it's all about building for the local conditions, to be comfortable and practical without needing inputs of energy other than something like walking across the room to lower the awnings. And it's not just about buildings. but about the whole local environment and the people using it and how they do that. And of course, this is the bread and butter of we historic environment people. This integrated view is what we do, and trying to understand the evolution of what's come down to us and why it is the way it is. And keeping it going too. Once a building's up, it's our responsibility to keep it up, and we have to work out how to make everything work and never just throw away and start again. And that's as sustainable as it could possibly be. And we're also used to learning all the time, learning from what works and what doesn't, and then figuring out how to pass that learning on to others. And the other thing that comes naturally to us is, of course, the long view from right back into the past, way before the Industrial Revolution, through what's happening now and right into the far future. For us, 2050 is just the blink of an eye. It's only when you look closely at the information up there in places like the Global ABC website that you realise this viewpoint isn't just important, it's pretty much unique. And that's rather scary, because if the world keeps going on its current path, we won't get to where we need to be. There's a really strong risk we'll in fact be heading off down a dead end into maladaptation. We all know at the moment that the older buildings and vernacular buildings are being framed as the villains of this story, so there's a serious risk we'll muck up the remains of a truly, demonstrably sustainable built environment before we've had a chance to learn from it. CHN members know all of this. Of course, what we need to do is work out how to get these messages out to the wider world. We need to get people listening and working across borders of all kinds, north, south, urban, rural, past, present, and then taking the best of the pre-carbon ideas and the best of the industrial ideas and melding them into a new third way, a really sustainable approach to built environments that will get us through coming storms. Planners and politicians and just ordinary people really need to imagine, to see what such a world might look like, and then it will be clear what we all need to do to get there. And again, the CHN has the right tools for this, the cultural tools to help people envisage the future and make it real and desirable and therefore achievable. So the CHN really could save the world, and who better than us? So our question to you is, for this whole assembly, how do we start?
Well, thank you, Robin, for that hymn to arts and culture and heritage, and thank you to CHN for the opportunity to be here at COP and really bringing this message to the important global climate change discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl and Robin, for that true call to arms. Excuse the pun. Next to another session on our working groups, and again I'll hand over to Hannah to introduce us to the different teams.
Thank you. So yes, back to our working groups. So next we're going to hear from Working Group 3 from Mark Brandt from NTBA Associates, Ottawa, Canada, and Laurie Ferris from Goody Clancy, Boston in the USA. Mark, I think we have you now. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Hi, everyone. Let's get my screen up.
Mark, I think we have you now. Welcome.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Hi, everyone. Get my screen up.
sure we can hear you at the moment. And we can't see your screen, Laurie. Can you hear me?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Everyone, that's my screen up.
I think we might have to go to the next speakers and come back to Mark and Laurie. Is that possible?
We can't see your screen, Laurie. Can you hear me?
Sort of. Apologies, everyone.
You cannot see the screen?
Laurie, we can't see your screen. I think something's frozen at your end. Aha.
Just a moment. Speakers and
excellent. Okay.
Is that possible? I can't see your screen, Laurie. Can you hear me? Apologies, everyone. You cannot see the screen. Laurie, we can't see your screen. I think something's frozen at your end. Aha.
Could we stop this connection and move to the next speaker, please? Thank you. Sorry, everyone, about that. I think we've got a few connection problems at that end, so we're going to move on to our next speaker now. We're going to hear from Dr. Kathy Daly from the University of Lincoln and Carry Conservation International, and Dr. Paloma Guzman from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, Department of Heritage and Society, and ICOMOS, Mexico. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Glasgow calling. I hope you can hear us. Yeah, it's a real pleasure for Paloma and I to be here in the room today, and we miss all of you guys that we've been seeing on screen. We're going to present very briefly the work that we did with Working Group 4 on HICLIP, which stands for Heritage in Climate Planning. And it was really a tool that was developed in order to understand the intersections between cultural heritage and climate change policy and planning around the world. So, not very ambitious. Next slide. Yes, so briefly I'm going to introduce Working Group 4, then Paloma will talk to you a little bit about the pilot project results. We'll talk about the benefits and limitations, and then next steps. Next slide. So, first of all, very importantly, as with all the working groups, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for our, the brilliant participation that we get from everybody. So, big thanks to the ICOMOS Secretariat who helped us with our international questionnaire, and to all the ICOMOS members that fill that out. To all the members of Working Group 4, it's been a long process. We're focusing here today on the pilot project report, but there's a lot of other work that went into that. So thank you to everybody. And the names on the screen are the volunteers who actually took part in the pilot project, coding and reviewing the HICLIP tool. Next slide, please. So this is the HICLIP project so far. We started off, Working Group 4 members came up with keyword selection for searching the plans. Then we did, as I mentioned, an online questionnaire with the help of ICOMOS in order to identify potential plans for analysis. The coding tool was developed, again, with input from Working Group 4. And then Paloma tested and validated that in a case study in Norway. And then what we're focusing on here today, and what you will find in the report, which is online, so you can get all the detail you want from that, is the pilot project, where we actually had volunteers from Working Group 4 coding plans using that HICLIP tool. Our ultimate aim is a global analysis, as I said, so that's what we're working towards. So the pilot project then, we looked at 9 plans. 5 were national from around the world, and 4 were local and regional. And We had the help of 18 volunteers, that themselves from 12 different countries, looking at plans in 3 different languages. Here's a few of our happy volunteers. There's lots more who aren't in that picture, but it just shows you how much they really enjoyed working with Highcliffe. And now I'll hand over to Paloma.
Thank you very much. Just a reminder that climate plans it's the document on a governmental document on how climate action is organized within a territory, right? So what we did was looking on in which instances, in which activities, cultural resources are being included, mentioned. And what we identified with this project, it's 17 specific actions answering to the question of where can we start. This is just a view on how our sector can contribute to what governments are indicating, identifying as important, where culture has an incidence. And we also systematically organize or identify how culture aligns within these actions across the main climate actions, mainly in 3, which is adaptation, vulnerability assessments, and mitigation actions. The contribution of this project is that it also identifies, in terms of the planning mechanisms, the level of integration of culture. This means 3 levels, basically. One is the narratives of what is what is the sustainable desire of a climate future that governments want to move into, which is the narrative. The other is the level, it's the concrete action, it's called the operational. So where in actions cultural resources are being integrated. And the last level is the monitoring level. So how many indicators or assessment tools can actually be informed by cultural resources, the impact of cultural resources, or how society can relate to their improvements through cultural resources. Next slide, please. So we were able also to identify trends based on statistical analysis. So this image is not for you to understand. This is just an image where we can identify or show that the different ways in which cultural resources can be mentioned across different contexts was possible to identify by using our keywords and the process that we are explaining within the report that you can check later. And our main results or our main conclusions is that we found a dichotomy in practice. This means that there is an increasing inclusion or recognition of cultural resources by other sectors, by agriculture, for example, natural resource management, and other sectors that are not necessarily working or used to work in direct collaboration with the cultural sector. We also identify that those cultural resources under the mandate of the cultural sector, such as museums, arts, and other elements, are not necessarily included. So still, a main element or interest is the conservation of cultural heritage. This tells us that there is a gap between the need of other sectors to reach local communities, to include, for example, indigenous people or just a broader community, and what they value as their heritage, as their cultural resources, and what is the mandate of the cultural sector. So the dichotomy means that plans are recognizing how these elements are important, but there is no inclusion on the mechanisms, the knowledge, the tools and methodologies that perhaps the cultural sector are more used to, or they are experts on. So we are not really communicating that well. Next slide.
So yeah, the benefits of Highcliffe's tool is, as Paloma was saying, that it can, the pilot study really demonstrated that the tool is able to effectively interrogate these 3 different dimensions. That is how cultural heritage is conceptualized in the plans, the policy context that it occurs in, and then that governance treatment, whether it's strategic or whether it's actually more concrete in terms of operationalization and even monitoring. Next slide. So ultimately, we can demonstrate through HiCLIP to both policymakers and cultural and heritage professionals all the potential intersections as well as the existing intersections of cultural resources with different government sectors at different levels in policy, and then identify, hopefully, sort of state of the art in terms of how that mainstreaming is occurring. In terms of limitations, obviously there are different understandings of what cultural heritage is, and different people coming from different backgrounds. So when it comes to volunteers doing the coding, that was a little bit of an issue. Being a pilot, we were limited in the number of plans, and we only did it in 3 languages. And the other thing is that we didn't look at climate plans which are specifically tailored for cultural heritage. That wasn't within our remit.
Next, please. So for the next steps, as we were mentioning before, with this dichotomy, our tool is useful for cultural or cultural practitioners from the cultural sector to identify how much their mandate or the areas where they have some responsibility are being included or not. But it can also be a way for them to understand how other sectors are requiring methods, knowledge related to cultural resources, their management, and valuing local cultural heritage. So this tool can actually help reducing the bias of cultural heritage practitioners and maybe take a step forward to reach and meet other sectors in more local context. So this also will facilitate within the 17 actions on how the heritage sector that is usually top-down can actually start taking some initiatives considering more bottom-up approaches. However, if we want to explore the utility of this tool for comparative analysis at a global level, if we want to involve more people working with this tool, we need to work on their biases, because what we found is that people are usually looking for what they know, and it's difficult to take away your mindset and try to explore what else can be culture rather than what you think you know it is. So in this way, we think that HiCLIP's analysis, the methodology, is useful to identify global best practices and the governance mechanisms that produce them. So we are not only showing just only one case, but actually to understand what is the governance context that allows this practice to be maybe transferable in different contexts. As I said, also applying the tool could also advance the national agendas for the sector or for other sectors. And it is possible to apply it at national, regional, and local levels. So we can actually contribute with assessing policies and maybe try to make culture be mainstreamed in climate governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Paloma and Kathy. So just a shout out to those of you in virtual land. Could you please turn your microphones off unless you're presenting, because the problems that we had trying to hear from Mark and Laurie, we think are probably caused by some feedback in your microphones being left on. So if you could take a moment to just double check that your microphone is off, that would be greatly appreciated. We're going to move on now to hear from Sarah Crofts and Claire Maguire about Working Group 1. Sarah Crofts is Chief Executive of the Institute of Conservation, ICON, and Claire Maguire is a Policy and Research Officer at the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA. Sarah.
Hello to everyone here and in the worldwide party that is the Climate Heritage Network. I look at the global audience and I see a network of knowledgeable, talented, resourceful and passionate professionals. You all are an amazing asset for our cultural heritage. But now we need to take that expertise and share it with those who are still learning and with those who have the power to drive positive change. So my role today is to challenge you to be braver, bolder, and more confident climate heritage advocates. But we know that not everyone feels confident in communicating. So we, in our working group, focusing on that issue of communication, have come together to produce an advocacy toolkit. And the idea is to give you all the support that you need to do this well. We all have the power to communicate the role of cultural heritage in climate action. And we hope that this toolkit will help you to do this with ease and with passion and commitment that we know you have. So I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Claire to explain a little bit more in detail about what we've produced. Hopefully.
Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, IFLA, and IFLA's been very honored to be involved in Climate Heritage Network over the last few years since the founding of the network, and I personally have been involved in the first working group 1, working on communications. So I will share a little bit more detail about the products that we developed. So the goal of our working group was to create tools to empower cultural heritage professionals to advocate for their own work and their work's role in climate action. We wanted these materials to help translate their experience into impactful, effective advocacy that can change minds, influence opinions, gain wider support, and inspire positive action. And one challenge faced by our working group was determining how to advise on communication and advocacy when this can take on so many different forms. So therefore, our approach here is not prescriptive in that all steps should be followed in the material that we present. We present options by which you can frame an approach. It can be casual interactions or an elaborate strategic engagement plan. And this framework offers a reference. It touches on key elements in communicating, in advocating, that are likely applicable in different interactions. And so the opening line, and indeed the sentiment that sits at the very core of our advocacy guide, is the statement that anyone can be an advocate. Advocating is not only to policymakers or only through your organization's official communications channels. Advocacy can happen in many different situations with many different types of people, and it can still make a difference. So the outputs of our working group are these 2 resources. The primary output is the Climate Action Advocacy Guide, and it's accompanied by some additional resources. And I thought I'd give a quick look at those additional resources first, as it provides some background into the groundwork that our working group used in the development process of the guide, and it can continue to be a helpful resource going forward. So we wanted to start with a clear understanding of what Climate Heritage Network's vision is, what is its elevator pitch, its reason for being, and We felt if we have that in place, we have a solid base on which we can help members build all future arguments and conversations. So drawing from our own experience and interactions with Climate Heritage Network, the working group members put forward ideas that were reworked and reformulated until we landed on a vision and a one-line tagline, so to say. And you see them here. So we envision a world where the global cultural heritage sector and other stakeholders in climate action are united in meeting the challenges of the climate crisis. And then again, Climate Heritage Network uniting cultural heritage and climate action communities worldwide. And we feel this vision, it centers on the importance of reaching out beyond our sector and reaching across our sector in uniting with all stakeholders in addressing the challenges of the climate crisis. And it alludes to culture being on equal footing with these other stakeholders and having a seat at the table, working collaboratively towards meeting this challenge. And we feel this vision underlines the work of Climate Heritage Network and that of the other working groups who have elaborated on different ways the cultural heritage sector contributes, and as well the advocacy of Climate Heritage Network at a high level in getting cultural stakeholders those seats at the table. So we invite you to share in this vision in your interactions during COP26 and of course in all future action. And in order to further build a confident approach in advocating for culture's role in climate action, we felt we should boil down the key talking points into a short explainer. And users can use this explainer as an easy reference of a confident, short, and clear statement on culture and climate action. And in addition, in order to decide how we could best help the sector in communication and in advocacy, we wanted to see what is already being done. And therefore, our working group collected an entirely non-exhaustive overview of different communications materials that we were aware of existing to see what types of resources are being created, what different audiences those are being geared towards, and what the messages of those materials were. And so the materials were analyzed to determine the audience type, and we broadly assigned 3 types: policymakers, professionals, and public. They were analyzed to see what types of material were being created for these different types of audience, and further to determine what the call to action was for each audience in each type of material. And this exercise attempted to measure who organizations were already trying to reach, what types of communications material they were using to do so, and what they hoped their audience would do with the information provided. And all of that material, perhaps it could be a reference to you when deciding what types of material you would make or what types of material are fit for different audiences. These can all be found in the additional resource document. And that brings us to our primary resource, the Advocacy Guide. This is a guide for all people who are active in climate heritage work, whether it is professionals, volunteers, students, and really anyone that's passionate about working in this sector and across and beyond this sector to address these challenges of climate action. So it helps users think mindfully and strategically through the different steps of communicating and advocating for the role of culture in climate action. And some advocacy can be a planned campaign, especially when being directed to policy and decision makers, but sometimes it can also take the form of off-the-cuff conversations that can help influence opinion, open the doors to professional networking and collaboration opportunity, and help simply raise general awareness. And so this is not a definitive list, but it gives an indication of where advocacy can happen and how our resource might help you be prepared in these situations when the opportunity arises. The guide touches on topics such as the steps you can take to prepare to be an advocate ahead of time, setting goals, objectives, and finding your own personal motivation. It takes users through the process of identifying audiences, determining their values, meaning what they may care about and how you might have the biggest impact. It introduces the concept of an advocacy ask, So what might your call to action be and how it can be tailored to different audiences and their values. It touches on approaching policy and decision makers and how you might formulate a statement that is fit to their values and points of view. It helps you formulate an approach into a strong key message, which is accompanied by proof points that can help strengthen an argument. And it offers keywords that may be appropriate to different audiences to help address values in a shared language. And it touches on handling negativity, including providing some ideas on how to positively counter typical negative feedback that you might hear. So this guide provides a foundation to help you translate your expertise into powerful advocacy. And the content of that is up to you. So in the immediate and in the longer term future, we hope users will use these resources to build confidence and get inspired to communicate effectively about their work. Use this guide to build one's own advocacy plan. And that could also include integrating that element of communications and outreach and engagement into the work plans that you're already doing in your areas of expertise. And in that, defining objectives and asks, advocacy asks, identifying audiences, determining key messages and proof points, and all of which to speak up for culture's role in climate action. And with COP26 underway, we hope that this network here of people working in and loving culture, heritage, and the arts can benefit immediately from this work and take these tips forward in your interactions, not only in these coming weeks, but in the long term. So I will end with the powerful statement that also ends our guide. Heritage drives climate ambition and action. Heritage anchors us with a sense of place, and every place has a climate story. We can help tell these stories. So our working group hopes that our work can help empower you to go forward and help tell these stories. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It looks like we have live streaming back from our virtual audience. So I'm going to try again to hand over to Working Group 3 and Mark Brandt and Laurie Ferris. Over to you guys. Hopefully it works this time.
Right. Thanks so much, Hannah. Let's try again. Attempting to share screen.
There we go.
Going through. Excellent.
Hi, everyone. I just want to make sure all can hear me. We'd like to apologize for the technical difficulties there, but we can rejoice that we're back. My name is Mark Brandt, and I'm presenting today with Laurie Ferris. We were helping with Working Group 3, which tipped the name Building Reuse is Climate Action. And this presentation, which is our product, and today is a celebration of achieving our Madrid-to-Glasgow journey over the last couple of years, why recycling building makes carbon sense, and how rapid carbon reduction to net zero makes the case, in fact, for building reuse. Next, please. So what did Working Group 3 do in the Madrid to Glasgow Climate Action Plan? We boiled it down to 3 tasks. We wanted to show how the world within the building industry and within the built heritage conservation sector can leverage the tools and data. We wanted to try and communicate case studies so that as broadly as possible, people within these sectors can learn from them and innovate from that learning. And we wanted to look at how we're going to develop the policy context. So Laurie and I are going to quickly go through these 3 areas today in a brief summary to just give you an idea of what we did. It all starts, of course, in Paris. It's now 6 years ago. It's hard to believe that it's that long ago, but it is. And 1.5 degrees is the answer. you know, 2 degrees is the soft version to try and get reluctant politicians on board, but 1.5 degrees is the answer. And next slide, please. And because 1.5 degrees is the answer, there's 2 charts I want to show you. First, this one, which is the time value of carbon. If we get a reduction sooner, we will achieve a lot more. If we get reductions later, we will achieve a lot less. That's essentially what this chart shows us. And the next chart as well, in order to, oh, I'm sorry, I'm one step ahead of myself. I'll take the pause then here, a little time out to say that we're losing cultural heritage. As Carl said earlier and others have said in today's meeting, we are really, we're really up against it. We're already losing cultural heritage. So what we're trying to do is the prevention side, but also we need mitigation and adaptation to ensure that our cultural heritage is not lost. Next. And that other chart tells us how we can get to 1.5%. This one shows the 28% in the light blue and the 11% just below it is traditionally what we've called the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions from the building industry. But as the Global ABC and Architecture 2030 point out, the 2 groups that Carl mentioned, there's other building material manufacturing that are involved as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, the built heritage industry, if you will, or sector, is part of the building industry that really accounts for half the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And of course, most of these buildings are existing and historic buildings. So if we don't address existing and historic buildings, we won't reach our climate targets. And it's by the very act of reusing buildings, retrofitting, adaptively reusing, rehabilitating, and bringing them into net zero carbon and using low carbon emitting materials. That the very action of doing that is really where we're at. So reusing and retrofitting an existing building can result in 70 to 85% reduction in embodied carbon emissions compared to new construction. Lori and I are 2 of the co-chairs of the Zero Net Carbon Collaboration for Existing and Historic Buildings. This is the statement on which that group is based, and co-chairing Working Group 3 next. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Lori to get into a little bit more of the details and a little bit more of, I guess, the technical side to help show you what our product is doing from Working Group 3. Go ahead, Lori.
Thanks, Mark. So as we've just heard from Mark and as we heard from Carl and Robin earlier, we know that we have this necessity to reuse our existing and historic built environment. It contributes, as Mark said, 28% of global emissions just to operate all of these buildings. But at the same time, we can't afford to tear them down and replace them because of the tremendous upfront embodied carbon cost of new construction, not to mention all of the cultural and other environmental impacts of demolition and replacement. And so what I task the cultural heritage industry with is really leading in the responsible reuse of existing buildings as a dramatic climate solution. Just to quickly go through a few definitions we've thrown out so far. First, operational carbon emissions. These are the emissions that come from operating buildings, heating, cooling, lighting, any other power that is required to use a building. And this is typically what's measured in policy and regulation. And when we say net zero, typically that's only referring to these operational emissions. So what we're really missing in all of these definitions is the embodied carbon, or the carbon footprint associated with every other stage of the life cycle of a building, product, material, assembly, or entire structure. And so these emissions mostly happen upfront from material extraction, processing, construction, et cetera, and also account for demolition and end of life. And so it's very important to be able to quantify both operational emissions, but also these embodied emissions. And the last definition I want to go through is avoided impacts. And this one is particularly relevant when speaking about the benefits of building reuse, because the avoided impacts are those the emissions that we save by making one decision instead of another. So for example, when we choose to reuse and upgrade an existing building, we're avoiding emissions both from replacement new construction, and we're also avoiding emissions that would have occurred from the inefficiency of the pre-renovated building. And so the avoided impacts are really the quantified benefits, environmental benefits of building reuse. So there are a number of tools and quite a bit of data out there which support sustainable and responsible building reuse. Many of these come from our Working Group 3 membership and include excellent examples and resources, tools for practitioners and for others. But what is really missing here is a tool that tells that life cycle carbon story. And so to fill that gap, we have been working on a new tool called CARE, the Carbon Avoided Retrofit Estimator, which is a very quick, high-level tool for quantifying those avoided impacts of reusing and upgrading an existing or heritage structure compared to replacing it with new construction. This is a simple dashboard-style tool with drop-downs through which you define the building, where it is, what a potential renovation might look like or rehabilitation, and then what a potential hypothetical construction would look like. And the goal of this tool is that it's accessible to policymakers, to planners, to advocates, or to practitioners, that you don't have to be very technically savvy and you don't have to know a lot about the potential building project in order to get a quick high-level estimate of that avoided carbon. So just to quickly show you what that looks like with one example, this is a building which was recently comprehensively renovated in Boston. It's 1950s, so really quite recent heritage for us here. But this building had many energy upgrades as well as a comprehensive renovation and some addition as well. So this was a very intensive reuse of a building. But when we put this into the estimator, into the CARE tool, we can see that over the first 15 years, getting back to that question of time value, it's really those early emissions that matter the most to tackling our, to meeting our 1.5 target. We can see that the renovation in the middle results in much less carbon emissions compared to either doing nothing to the existing building or replacing it with new construction. And that's because we have, compared to new construction, a much lower embodied carbon, and compared to the pre-renovation existing condition, a much lower energy use. And so very quickly, we can get that snapshot of the carbon benefits of reuse. And so this is where we are now. Just as a little glimpse of next steps, we are working with our Working Group 3 membership to expand this to have greater geographic reach, as well as to bolster the data for both for the North America and other locations, as well as to move to a web application for greater accessibility. So as Mark mentioned, beyond tools, we've also been trying to gather case studies which make this case for building reuse as climate action. We're going to go through a few quick examples. The first is this office building in Belgium, which underwent a very lovely rehabilitation and addition to modernize the building. And a life cycle assessment was performed of this project to quantify the environmental benefits of the rehabilitation that took place compared to a hypothetical new construction replacement building. And you can see both in terms of energy on the left and carbon on the right, the rehabilitation resulted in almost every life cycle stage of the building in a much greatly lowered environmental footprint compared to the new construction. Another example is this dwelling in Valencia, Spain, which is beautifully restored using traditional materials and techniques, which, as Robbie mentioned, has the benefits of both stewarding traditional local knowledge, as well as that those materials have a lower impact on the environment because they were pre-industrial revolution materials and techniques. And once again, on the right here, you can see the life cycle assessment results. And here you can really see the environmental benefits of the rehabilitation, in this case, both in metrics of global warming potential, which is carbon emissions, but also across every other environmental impact category, which was measured through life cycle assessment.
The next case study we looked at is in a cold climate, Ottawa, Canada. And in this case, we understood the building from a holistic perspective and looked at all aspects of sustainable rehabilitation. This building was a bank building and was converted into a Hall of State for the House of Commons in Canada. And as you can see, it was designated heritage, both interior and exterior, and despite that, achieved a very high level of energy reduction and carbon reduction. And finally, a case study in a warm climate, warm, humid climate, San Antonio, Texas, Kelso House. And in this case, we can see the use of craftspeople who are rehabilitating the traditional materials, and so also explains how not only do we achieve a low carbon resilience, but also greater factors, not just at a cultural level, but at a social level as well, where more jobs are produced through rehabilitation than through new construction, which has a greater embodied carbon of manufacturing. And finally, we promised you we would also be looking at policy. So just a very quick overview of what the policy subgroup looked at. Of course, policies come from a wide range. It's not just governments. Well, first of all, it's all kinds of governments, multilaterals, nationals, all the way down to local governments. And government agencies, or as we call them in Canada, crown corporations. And then the other thing, though, is institutions. Institutions have huge amount of impact in the policy sector as well. It could be large corporations, religious entities, universities, museums, and there's a lot of policy that can be, I would say, washed through for decarbonization. And there's two real sort of overview groups of actions: investment and incentives, or regulations and costs. And on the building environment side, building codes are huge, but all of those items listed in that bottom right list are important as well. On the upper right list, grants, tax credits, and rebates, you know, the carrots are good, but training and leading by example. Governments really need to lead by example and set their targets extremely high in order to bring their national declarations into line with the Paris Agreement. Next. And in the policy area, we also wanted to show examples of good practices. So our policy group looked around the world at different policy actions. This is an example from Morocco, a policy for the reuse of mosques and the rehabilitation of mosques in order to reduce energy and ultimately start to decarbonize and eventually fully decarbonize at that same level. Next. So in conclusion, there was a number of things that we concluded. This is just a very short list. First of all, that heritage conservation professionals have the skills to design interventions into existing buildings while retaining the value, and that's the value. Traditionally, we've retained heritage value, but this experience and skill will help us retain environmental value, economic value, social value as well. So we're trying to convince the conservation community that we make good leaders to help us scale up. We have a very urgent and very large scale up for deep green retrofit reuse of this massive inventory of existing buildings. And then, of course, the tools that we have and the tools that we are building around the world should really become part of everyday practice. Next point would be that heritage buildings can actually be laboratories for innovation. When we need to scale up across all existing buildings, heritage buildings can really be innovators because they're the sort of most difficult case scenario. So, and heritage buildings and actors can help educate the public and increase understanding and support for building reuse as climate action, as some of our previous speakers have indicated. And finally, we'd like to thank all of the members. We have a truly international cast of characters that is on the Working Group 3. We've had a lot of work to accomplish these products, and a lot of people contribute at many levels. In particular, we'd also like to thank the Secretariat, so ably run by Andrew Potts, did an amazing job right from the get-go and all the way through. And our co-coordinator on this working group, who is the co-leader of the Climate Heritage Network, Julie Polanco, who you heard earlier, who's the SHPO. We like to call it the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer from California. So thank you to both Andrew and Julie and all of the people that put us through to celebrate, to be able to celebrate today these accomplishments and hopefully go out there and become part of that everyday conversation for COP26. And I'd like to also thank Lori, because I'm going to be stepping aside as we head down the next layer of path, and thank Lori for her able leadership, and we'll continue on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you to all our speakers from those working groups and for everybody who's got involved. There's a huge amount of work that we've heard from today, and an awful lot that we didn't have time for. So thank you all. I have also been asked to remind everybody that many of these resources are now available on the Climate Heritage webpage. There is a special tab now called Resource Library. So if you go to climateheritage.org, and select Resource Library, you will see the reports and the tangible results of many of these working groups. So have a look. Thank you.
So exciting. I have the honor now of introducing our last vignette, Navin Piplani, who is the Principal Director of Intact Heritage Academy, Angelica Arias Benvenidas, Executive Director of the Metropolitan Institute of Heritage in Quito, Ecuador, will be joining us virtually.
Thank you. And I hope you can hear us well.
We can hear you.
And see us, yes. Okay, so I'm going to take a few minutes and then invite Angelica to take over. And I'm just going to say that this initiative, the Race to Resilience, which the Climate Heritage Network has been working on and will be working on in the future, is quite a unique thing, and in many ways that it's got its set targets and goals. It will involve several people, cities, communities, etc., which are the aspects which perhaps we will hear more about tomorrow when it is officially launched. But I just wanted to highlight that it's quite a unique and quite an interesting thing that we have been doing and we will get into. Is that it's an interesting race. It's an interesting title where really the race involves several stakeholders and climate actors, and it's not a race amongst ourselves. It's not a race amongst the actors to win. It's a race. It's a different kind of a race where we have to run as one of the actors, and we also have to take other actors along. So really, it's not a race that CHN is going to win, because the CHN has got to take all the hundreds of members and all the hundreds of stakeholders working with us in one capacity or the other along, in terms of capacity building, in terms of hand holding, in terms of perhaps waiting at times so that the other actors come along. So in that sense, it is a race where everybody is running and everybody has to win. That's the way it'll have its impact against climate crisis. So it's not a race to be seen as a competition amongst all of us. We are together in it. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that while we are running, the others are also running. So there is a huge race going on for urbanization across the globe, where countries and cities are wanting to urbanize faster than before. There are also people who are wanting to modernize faster than before. There is a huge amount of development which one can see all across. So there is that kind of activity going on. There are people who want to achieve higher GDPs, political willingness and interest there to achieve higher GDPs, and then there is also a race for increased tourism. Now, so we are all part of this. So there is, we have to not only win the race to resilience against climate crisis, we also have to see how we negotiate with all these parallel activities going on alongside. So it's not that we are running alone. So as I said, we are a whole lot of people who are trying to build resilience against climate crisis, which is both a natural and a human phenomena, but then there are other phenomena that are also happening parallelly and perhaps being hurdles in this collective effort. So this is quite an intriguing, interesting initiative that we are working at CHN, and it would be interesting to see how it pans out and how we work together. It is quite complex in many ways, because some of our members may be participating in other initiatives that I just, or in other activities that I just mentioned. So one has to really see how we take everybody along. We don't leave anyone behind in this race to resilience, but we also negotiate with and talk to other stakeholders that are running parallel races, which may not necessarily always be in the interest of our work. And CHN, with its over 200 partner organizations and thousands of members, has a huge potential to impact on dealing with climate crisis, so that we not only kind of deal with it, but we thrive in this scenario of climate shocks. And I think we need to perhaps remind us and remind ourselves and all others that when we talk about climate crisis, count culture in and let culture win. Thank you. And now I'll invite Angelica for her piece.
Thank you, Naveen. I hope you can all hear me. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, and good night to everybody. Buenos días con todos desde Quito, from the Institute of Heritage of Quito. And well, it has been wonderful to hear about all the work that has been done in these 2 years. And in spite of the geographical distance that separates our regions, from the environmental and cultural point of view, we share similar pressures on states. Without any discussion, development, which has to be conceptualized from our own realities, has become the main and common driver for our regions. The present exercise gave us the opportunity to share experiences and the ideals that have to be placed in action through the implementation of public policy in order to contribute to a true development in our communities and in our countries, in our cities. Coming from different parts of the world, realizing that our problems and lives are similar, and therefore the way to positively transform them is an undoubtful proof of our bonds. As Naveen told us, CHN has applied and been accepted into the World Race to Resilience with other 23 initiatives, which are made up of over 2,500 non-state actors, taking action in over 100 countries across the campaign's theme of urban, rural, and coastal resilience. These efforts are exposed in the Resilient Hub, where we highlight the importance of culture, arts, and heritage as the support of resilience. And then I would like to share that, for example, Quito's resilience strategy incorporated cultural heritage as one of its main themes, placed among its priorities as part of the development plan of the city. The Resilience Hub, which will be addressed in the following days, will show several examples and aspects about the synergy between culture and resilience. I want to advance one of them to you, in which we have proposed together with Praxis and with a wonderful team from several places around the world, the presentation of some very rich projects about agriculture and food from the cultural view. And we are going to talk about the importance of agricultural and food intangible heritage, about the farmers and native people and their centuries-old traditional practices that were culturally and technologically in closeness with the environment, and also its potential as a strategy against climate change. Well, I think I will finish here because of the time. And I just want to tell you that I hope to see all of you in the coming days in the Resilience Hub. So all of you are invited to join us in the following days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. We are getting towards the end of the day, so Julie and I are going to present the next 20-minute session in 5 minutes. Easy, no problem. Some PowerPoint slides, please. We're just going to very quickly report on Working Group 8, which is building the constituency for COP26. You've heard so much today about that. I don't think we need to go into a lot of detail. You've had lots of adverts for some of the Blue Zone, Green Zone events that are coming up. Members will have been sent emails. There's information on the website, so we don't need to go through the program. What we would like to do is just briefly highlight 2 key outputs from that working group. But first, next slide, please, is some of the people who contributed to that working group. So just to say, thank you to everybody who volunteered and helped us with Working Group 8, with the manifesto draft, with the Culture at COP website, with the issue leads and all the other activities that we've folded in to the outputs from Working Group 8. So thank you to everyone, and apologies if your name's not on there and you have helped, because it's just been so many people. It's been overwhelming for us. Thank you. Next slide, please. Draw your attention to the Culture at COP website, which was launched a couple of months ago now, with some information on the relevance and role of culture at the COP. Next slide, please. Giving a little bit of inspiration to those who are not so familiar with our cause about the power of arts, culture, and heritage for climate action. Next, please. And a little bit more depth about how culture relates to climate objectives. Next, please. And some pieces of text for actors who want to partake in our agenda. Next, please. A main function of this website is as an events place where it's easy for players to register events before, at, during, after, around the COP. And we're delighted that when I looked a couple of weeks ago, there was 150 events. I think it's now topping 200. I haven't checked recently. But it's fantastic how people are really engaging with the site. And this site will continue beyond COP26. Next, please. Just a little flavor of some of the groups who've climbed onto the website. Everything from music, poetry, art, seminars, workshops, food, you name it, it's there. And it's delighted to see that, embracing the whole range of culture and what we're trying to do here. Next, please. And in terms of contributors, that list is growing as well. And we've got numerous organizations and collectives who've signed up and committed themselves to the cause. One main objective of the website is to showcase the manifesto, which has been a major part of the work of the group. And next, please, Julie will just tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. So the manifesto, accelerating climate action through the power of arts, culture, and heritage, keeping 1.5 degrees alive. These key messages on culture and climate action so that we can communicate, engage, and inspire to increase ambition. The website is open and live. We have, just as about 5 minutes ago, 125 sign-ons, and we're getting more every day and every minute. So we encourage all of you to go to the Culture at COP website or the Cultural Heritage Network website and sign on to the manifesto. There's also quite a number of really good conversations that are in their listings of different ways in which culture plays a role in gender and food security and these kinds of things. And it's also a really good talking points document. It's a really good communications document. So I really encourage you to use it, to sign up, and to join us in this shared ambition to create a just, thriving, and resilient communities for today and into the future. Yep. Next slide. And that is our report. Thank you so much. Next, we have the great honor of introducing our secretariat and our leader and inspirer, Andrew Potts. Andrew.
Well, thank you, Ewan and Julie. Those of you that know me can well imagine that there are a lot of things I would like to say, and that given the chance, I can talk a lot. I wish I had time to say in full how awed I am by the work done by the working groups that you've heard about today. 2 years ago in Madrid, we committed to creating new tools and resources to break down barriers to climate action by cultural actors and operators. And today we're delivering. We said we'd do something, and we did it. And that's not so common in the world, and I'm proud of us. And then, of course, the success stories, the vignettes you heard. I could go on and on. But in the interest of time, I'm going to stick to the very specific assignment that I was given, and it's a delightful one, a joyful one, and that is to announce the results of the Climate Heritage Network regional co-chair elections that have been held over the past month. So in 2019, when the network was launched in Edinburgh, a leadership team was put into place consisting of 5 regional co-chairs from the 5 regions of the Climate Heritage Network, plus a steering committee of 20+ individuals. And all of those individuals have done incredible work over the last 2 years, and now we come to the point where their term is up. It was specified in our founding documents that 2 years thereafter, we would select a new leadership team. So first I want to thank and congratulate the members of the steering committee whose terms are up. There's been a month-long nomination process, and we have a pool of candidates for the next steering committee. Those new steering committee members will be selected from that pool by the new co-chairs. So let's get to the new co-chairs. We have 5 global regions, as I mentioned, and I first want to acknowledge the 5 co-chairs we have had over these past 2 years. For the Africa and the Arab States region, Dr. Albino Japella in Johannesburg. For the Asia Pacific region, Elizabeth Arecido in Suva, Fiji. For the Europe region, Dr. Ewan Hislop, Edinburgh. For our Latin America and the Caribbean region, Mayor Pedro Palacios, the mayor of Cuenca, Ecuador. And for our North America region, Julie Polanco from California. So 4 of those 5 co-chairs will be leaving us, rotating off. And so that takes me now to the results of the elections that we've just had. So I'm going to report the winners of those elections, and then we have those incoming co-chairs with us, and I'm going to invite them one by one to just say 1 minute of hello to you. You'll, of course, be getting to know them very well during their upcoming 2-year term. In the election held in the Africa and the Arab states region, 2 candidates, and the winning candidate there is Dr. Albino Japella. So Albino rejoining us for another term. In the election in the Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States region, a new, not a new person to the CHN, but a new person to the post of regional co-chair. The new co-chair is Europa Nostra, and you'll be hearing from its Secretary General in a moment. So a round of applause for Europa Nostra, the new co-chair for Europe. In the Latin America and the Caribbean region, another new co-chair, but not a new face to us, the Metropolitan Institute of Heritage in Quito, and you'll be hearing from its director, Angelica Arias, in a moment, so a round of applause for them. And finally, the new regional co-chair for North America, taking over from Julie Polanco. It's the City of San Antonio, Texas, Office of Historic Preservation. So thank you to the City of San Antonio. Applause, please. Now we're going to take advantage of the fact that we have our co-chairs, our incoming co-chairs with us, just to ask them to briefly reintroduce themselves to you. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order by region. So that means I'm going to start with Africa. You've already met Albino Japella, but not in this capacity as the incoming 2021-23 co-chair. And so Albino, the floor is yours. Maybe.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm not only delighted, but very humbled by the support and trust by CHN members. And I would like to especially thank the amazing experience and the extraordinary amount of support received from the other co-chairs, Iwan, Julie, Elizabeth, and from also the Office of the Mayor from the Latin America region. So I'm extremely delighted to be able to contribute now to strengthen the CHN in our region with the prospect of playing a more active role now that through the CVI support we'll be able to do a little bit more than we have been able to do. So I would like to express my great appreciation, and especially to you, Andrew, for all the support and all the work that you have been doing. It's really, really appreciated. So thank you so much, and on behalf of the Africa World Heritage Fund, we are really delighted to be able to contribute to climate action in our capacity. Thank you.
And we're expecting the announcement in the coming days that COP27 will be held in the Arab region, perhaps in Egypt. And so, Albino, we're looking forward to working you very, very closely in planning for COP27. Now, following the regions in alphabetical order, I'm going to go to Europe and give the floor to Snežka Quadvelig-Mihailović, who is the Secretary General of Europa Nostra. On any given day, Snežka could be in Bulgaria or Spain or Netherlands, all across Europe. Snežka, where do we find you today?
Hello, Glasgow. You find me in The Hague.
The Hague.
So in the Netherlands, and dear Andrew, dear Evan, dear colleagues, on behalf of Europa Nostra, the European voice of civil society committed to cultural heritage and also coordinator of the European Heritage Alliance and a proud founding member of the Climate Heritage Network, I wish to thank you for your confidence. And I wish to confirm that we accept the challenging task to become the next regional co-chair of the Climate Heritage Network covering Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States. As some of you know, Europa Nostra has a vast and relevant experience in managing membership, partnership and advocacy networks in the cultural field and also the wider world of culture. And as such, we were particularly active before, during and after the groundbreaking European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018 with Armenia. And that year helped articulate better the relationship between place, people and environmental sustainability. And today, we are keen to use this pan-European experience and network for the benefit of the Climate Heritage Network. Thanks, Andrew, to your vast knowledge and drive, Europa Nostra partnered with ICOMOS, the Climate Heritage Network, and the European Investment Bank Institute to produce earlier this year the European Cultural Heritage Green Paper. This paper scoped the ways cultural heritage can contribute to achieving the ambitious goals of the European Green Deal in the areas like renovation and reuse of the buildings, mobility, circular economy, energy, food and agriculture. And this paper, together with our recent Venice call to action for a new European Renaissance, reflect our ever-growing engagement with issues of cultural heritage and climate action in Europe and globally. To end, let me pay tribute to the impressive pioneering role played by all of you who have been leading and contributing to the Climate Heritage Network during the first 2 years of its existence. We have learned so much and we continue to learn from all of you. Today, as we are about to take over from Historic Environment Scotland and Dr. Evan Hislop, the role of regional co-chair, we are aware of the huge responsibility ahead of us. But with your commitment and advice, we shall do our utmost to live up to your expectations and our needs. Dear colleagues, let us continue to join our voices and forces across continents to truly unleash the great potential of culture and cultural heritage for an effective climate action as our contribution to the race to resilience here at COP26 and beyond.
Bravo. Thank you, Agnieszka. Thank you, dear Agnieszka. Now we're going to travel from The Hague in the Netherlands to Quito, Ecuador, and it's my pleasure to reintroduce you to Angelica Arias, who will speak on behalf of the Metropolitan Institute of Heritage in Quito, the new co-chair for our Latin America and the Caribbean region. Angelica.
Thanks a lot. Well, as Executive Director of the Metropolitan Institute of Heritage of Quito, it's an honor to be selected as co-chair of the CHN for the Latin American region, and also to follow in the footsteps of previous co-chair who have made an exceptional effort to enhance the role of culture, art, and heritage in sustainable development. Well, the Metropolitan Institute of Heritage is the site manager of Quito and has become the key partnership for multi-stakeholders collaboration in the field of preservation and conservation of the historic areas and the cultural heritage, and creating the communities inside and outside patrimonial assets to caring, protecting, promoting our historical memory. I just like to thank all the partners, all of you for all your commitment, especially Andrew for being a constant inspiration, to all the former co-chairs too for their hard work in the past 2 years, and also to the strong steering committee. And for the brand new co-chairs and members, please count on me, count on the Institute to continue working to empower culture as the key factor for to face climate change. Thank you very much. Gracias a todos.
Thank you, dear Angelica. And now for the final speaker of this penultimate segment of our program. We'll go a few thousand miles north from Quito to San Antonio, Texas, and Shannon Miller from the Office of Historic Preservation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I'm Shannon Miller. I'm the Director and the Historic Preservation Officer of the City of San Antonio, Texas Office of Historic Preservation. My colleagues, Stephanie Phillips and Dr. Jenny Hay, and I have been involved in the Climate Heritage Network from the outset, and I'm very excited about serving as co-chair for the North American region. I'd like to thank all of the outgoing co-chairs, but especially Julie Polanco for in advance for all the help that I know that she will give in transitioning. She's already promised. I very much look forward to working with all of the other, the new incoming co-chairs and the new steering committee. And, you know, we're very committed and excited about being a part of this global conversation about the role of culture and heritage and climate action, and really working with our CHN members to advance solutions and best practices. And so thanks for your confidence, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Shannon. So congratulations again to the incoming co-chairs, and thank you again to the outgoing co-chairs and also the outgoing members of the steering committee. Look for an announcement in the coming weeks from the new co-chairs as to the selection of the new steering committee members. And so now it's my, oh, Andrea. Oh, okay. Let's for sure talk right after the program. Excellent. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to move to the second to last element of our program. You heard me mention a moment ago COP27. Earlier today, Julie Polanco was chiding me for planning about COP27 when we've got 13 of 14 days of COP26 left to go. But there are also other important events on the horizon, of course, between now and COP27. And one of them coming up soon is the World Urban Forum, which has always been an important venue for addressing culture and climate change. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Shipra Narang Suri, member of the Climate Heritage Network Steering Committee and chief of the Urban Practices Branch of UN Habitat, which is the UN Human Settlements Program. I think Shipra is joining us from Nairobi. And we've asked Shipra to give you a welcome to World Urban Forum 11, WUF 11, one of the next major events the CHN will be engaging with. Dr. Shipra, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much, Andrew. And great to see you all, great to hear you all. I know many of you are in the room, and I'm so sorry to miss this gathering of friends and allies and co-conspirators meeting together in person after so long. Great to see you, Jordi, on the screen. And of course, I know Julie and Ewan and Armenia, Naveen, everyone. You know, if I rattled off how happy I am to see each and every one of you, that would take my 5 minutes. But this is really an important moment. I just, before I dive into WUF, I just want to say, I have not seen a network that within the first few years of its inception has achieved so much. There is no parallel. And I think that goes, you know, that is a result of the enormous amount of commitment, time, energy that, of course, Andrew, as the head of the Secretariat, has put into it, but each and every one of you and the commitment we see. We all have our day jobs, we all have our priorities, we all have our bosses and our managers. but people find time to do, to advance this agenda as part of their work and on the side of their work and in addition to their daily work, because this is so important. And so really on behalf of Habitat and as part of the steering committee, let me just, add my word of thanks to that. I was also listening, I joined slightly late. I've just flown in from Dubai where I was at the expo. And part of the reason I can't be at COP. But I caught the last series of presentations on advocacy and on buildings. And I was thinking, my goodness, the amount of cutting edge thinking that's in this room. Even we as UN Habitat, I'm already making connections in my mind on how we can use your care tool, Lori, and the work that was mentioned around avoided carbon through building reuse. We have an urban regeneration flagship. I'm going to put you in connection with them right away because I think this is a tool that from UN Habitat side we can use and amplify, and many other things. The advocacy toolkit, I was completely blown away by the very systematic approach to advocacy and the tools that you're providing to all the members. So thank you for all of those. All of this is going to come in come in very, very handy and be very important as we convene at the World Urban Forum next year. The World Urban Forum, as Andrew mentioned, is in some ways the main gathering of on cities and human settlements globally that happens every 2 years. We've had 10 so far. So over the last 20 years, literally the World Urban Forum is an institution in and of itself. It convenes national governments, local governments, urban thinkers, practitioners, actors, academia. And we have seen over the last several forums, editions of the last several forums, a stronger engagement with the heritage community and the climate community as well. So I think that's very important because these are all, these are all different dimensions of the same issue, of the same challenge. The challenge of inequality, the challenge of disharmony, the challenge of climate, the challenge of rebuilding and reinventing our world in this post-crisis, in this post-pandemic era. Basically, the challenge of fixing a system that is broken and that does not work for everyone. And it particularly does not work for those who are living in urban, peri-urban areas, in small towns and large cities, who are being left behind in this in the race towards greater economic growth. It's not working, and that's why the World Urban Forum is the place to discuss solutions, ideas, progress, advocate for better and stronger action. It's very, very important. The World Urban Forum typically sees about 20 to 25,000 people in person. I do not know what a post-pandemic World Urban Forum will look like, to be very, very honest. I'm trying to learn, we're trying to learn lessons from, the hesitating steps that the world is taking towards meeting in person. And Jodi's summit in Izmir, the UCLG Culture Summit in Izmir, was one of them, where we looked at, what will a hybrid meeting look like? And you did so well, Jodi, there. That was really great. But also the challenges of COP. In some ways, some articles, some authors, some are saying that this COP is highly exclusionary. It's leaving a lot of people out because of barriers of entry and because of vaccinations and because of the pandemic and inability of people to travel. But we are also seeing that by making a forum like that hybrid, we can go from 20,000 to 2 million like this. Because a lot of people can engage. If it is truly hybrid, a lot of people can engage in conversations from where they are. Perhaps they can't travel due to health reasons. Perhaps they can't travel because countries won't give them visas. Perhaps they can't travel because the cost is enormous. This is also our opportunity to bring in a lot more people that we were not, and we typically would not be able to bring into a forum due to all these barriers. So I think the World Urban Forum, a proper hybrid World Urban Forum in Katowice in June 2020 next year in Poland, could well kick off the new generation of World Urban Forums, which are different in their absolutely in their organization, but hopefully not in their spirit. The World Urban Forum is structured around several, what shall I say, flagship kind of events. It has 6 major dialogues, 6 or 8 major dialogues. It's a whole week. It has assemblies of different stakeholder constituencies that meet before. There's the Assembly of Local and Regional Governments, there's the Assembly of Young People, there's the Assembly of Women, the Gender Assembly, the Business Assembly. So they meet, they convene, they caucus in some ways. And they think about the advancement that we need to make at this World Urban Forum. And then, of course, over the 4 days of the forum, there's a lot of engagement. There are networking events and there are side events. And what I want to see at the next World Urban Forum is really hands-on clinics for support. And this is where the tools you're developing in this space are very important. If a city comes there and says, I need help because I have this, this heritage area, this town center that we want to redevelop, and I want to do it right, but I don't know how. Or a city says, I want to do it, but I don't know where to start. And that's where you start with the advocacy. So there is a room, there will be room for the Climate Heritage Network to engage with a much wider community of practice or multiple communities of practice, all of which have something to do with our work, because this is such a multi-dimensional area. You can't just talk to heritage practitioners and you can't just talk to climate experts. You have to talk to the engineers, the architects, the planners, the historians, as we know from the CHN composition. So the World Urban Forum will open up that world of multi-dimensional communities of practice who you can bring into your work, learn from, share your tools, your experiences, and basically go to scale. That is what it offers. And I think that's very, very, very important. For us, at the last World Urban Forum, culture was one of the themes, and it's becoming quite important. Of course, climate underpins the concern for climate, and the climate emergency and climate action underpins everything we do. One of the additional purposes of the World Urban Forum, this was the original purpose, but now it's an additional purpose, is to inform and support UN Habitat in defining its own priorities and programming and strategic thinking for the future. And I think that's very important also, that we bring in new voices, new perspectives, new actors into this space who say, stop, you haven't thought about this. You may have had 10 World Urban Forums, but you have not considered this dimension, or you have not considered this aspect, or you have not talked to this stakeholder, or you have not brought in this actor who can help advance this particular agenda. So it's an open space. It's not an intergovernmental negotiation space the way COP is. It is an open space. It is a learning space. It is a networking space. It is an advancement space, multi-stakeholder space, where and it's a space for ideas, for the advancement of ideas. And that's what I would like you, each one of you, and your networks, and your colleagues, and your institutions to bring to us at the World Urban Forum. We will be much, much richer for it. And I think the community that meets, the urban community that meets in Katowice will be much richer for it. We'll be happy to share more details through Andrew and through the Secretariat as the program gets firmed up. But this is really my own personal appeal and my plea for you to join, for you to share, for you to engage, for you to educate the much larger community out there about the importance of the work that you're doing. Thank you, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, dear Shipra. high-level segment at WOOF 9 in Abu Dhabi on cities, climate change, and culture that Shipra chaired and which featured the Prime Minister of Fiji, Frank Bainimarama, was really a highlight. And we're looking forward to being in Katowice in June. And dear Śnieżka, we're counting on Europa Nostra to help open doors for us in Poland and beyond. So we've come to the end of our program right on time by Pot's time, which you know is somewhat fallible. But for that, I'm happy to introduce Julie and Ewan in their new capacities. So the steering committee at its final meeting decided to create the new position of immediate past chair of the network, bestowed upon 3 people, Mayor Pedro Palacios of Cuenca, Ecuador, Julie Polanco, and Ewan Hislop. So please welcome back to the podium immediate past chairs, Julie and Ewan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew. We have to be out of this building fairly soon, so Julie and I are just going to wrap up very, very quickly. I'm going to say some thank yous. I'd like to thank all the speakers from many countries and multiple continents. We must count them, because that was amazing. To Rachel Stewart and my HES colleagues, all of you for your help and support. Thank you so much for making this happen. To our AV company, and you know, if it's not ambitious, we're not interested. You know, we're always ambitious in the CHN. That's what we do. So thank you, everybody, for your support. And thanks to all of those here in the room in Glasgow with us today, and to everyone online as well. And I'll hand over to Julie.
Thank you. What an honor to be finishing our co-chairship together. Come up. And you saw all the names. For the ones we didn't list, there are hundreds more, and we still want to engage in hundreds more. So for everybody here, for everybody at home, thank you for joining us. Continue to join us. COP-resilience-hub.org will be our event tomorrow. Go sign up, join us to start the launch and celebrate the good work that we're doing and the much, much deeper work we have to do. I'd like to thank my staff back in California. Mark Huck ran the Working Group 3 with Mark and Lori, and we didn't get to acknowledge him, but I'd like to just say thank you so much to everybody and all of you for being such an amazing team. And Andrew, we can't thank you enough for being such a stellar leader. Thank you for being with us today. And we have 2 minutes to go, to leave.
All right, 2, well, I only need 1 of them. So I think I'll ask Vanessa and Rachel from HES, or what am I meant to say? HES. H.
You're Australian.
This is a word I learned yesterday. So.